Chapter 1 Dawn of Myth and Legend. In the beginning, there was nothing but darkness. An endless, formless void chaos, a churning abyss of infinite potential. It was a realm without shape or substance, silent and empty, a place where time itself had not yet been born. But even in this darkness, the seeds of existence stirred. From the depths of chaos, a presence emerged, Gaia, the earth, vast and eternal. Her embrace was warm, her surface a cradle for mountains, valleys, and rivers. Life whispered in the breeze that swept over her hills, and the waters that traced her form sparkled with the promise of creation. Above her stretched Uranus, the sky, an infinite dome of shimmering stars. He was vast and powerful, his azure cloak a shelter for the world below. Together, Gaia and Uranus were the first, a union of earth and sky, a harmony of opposites. From their embrace came life, but it was not gentle. It was wild and chaotic. For their children were Titans, colossal beings of primal force and power. 12 mighty Titans were born, each embodying the raw elements of existence. Oceanus, the endless sea, flowed with the tides of eternity. Hyperion, the radiant light, bathed the world in his brilliance. And Cronus, the youngest, was a force of time itself, relentless and unyielding. Yet even as life spread across the world, so too did conflict. The Titans, powerful and proud, were beings of raw might and ambition, and their realm was one of struggle, but the world was not yet complete. Beneath the earth, in the shadowed depths of Tartarus, a dark and dreadful abyss yawned, a prison for the monstrous children of Gaia and Uranus. Cyclopes with a single blazing eye, and the 100-handed hecatontures, beings of terrible strength, writhed in the darkness, forsaken by their father. Uranus, fearing their power, cast them into the depths, a betrayal that festered in Gaia's heart. And so, the first seeds of rebellion were sown, the Titans and the rise of Olympus. From this turmoil, a new struggle emerged. Gaia, grieved by the suffering of her children, whispered of vengeance. She called upon her Titan offspring, urging them to rise against Uranus. But fear gripped them all but one. Cronus, the youngest and most cunning, seized the sickle of adamantine, a weapon forged in the depths of Gaia's rage. With it, he struck against the heavens, casting down Uranus and seizing his throne. But power was a treacherous gift. As Cronus ruled, a prophecy gnawed at his heart, a whisper that one of his own children would rise to overthrow him, just as he had done to his father. Paranoia consumed him, and each time his wife Rhea bore him a child, Cronus swallowed the newborn whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon all vanished into his dark, insatiable maw, yet Rhea, torn by grief, refused to surrender. When her final child was born, she hid him away, swaddling a stone in cloth and offering it to Cronus, who devoured it without question. The child was Zeus, spirited away to the hidden slopes of Mount Ida on the island of Crete. There, nursed by nymphs and raised in secret, Zeus grew in strength. His laughter mingling with the murmurs of ancient forests, time passed, and the day of reckoning arrived. Zeus, now grown and mighty, returned in a thunderous storm. With the help of his mother and a potion crafted by Metis, the goddess of wisdom, Zeus tricked Cronus into vomiting forth his siblings. One by one, they emerged, whole and strong gods of fire, harvest, sky, sea, and the underworld. United, they declared war upon the Titans. This was the Titanomachy, a clash that shook the cosmos. Lightning scorched the heavens, mountains crumbled, and the earth groaned beneath the fury of divine power. For 10 years, gods and Titans waged war. But in the end, the Titans fell. Cronus and his allies were cast into the shadowed abyss of Tartarus, imprisoned behind unyielding gates guarded by the Hecatoncheires. And upon the heights of Mount Olympus, Zeus and his siblings claimed their thrones. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the gods had begun. Zeus and the birth of the gods from his throne atop Olympus. Zeus reigned as king of the gods. His voice was thunder, his gaze the lightning that split the sky. Beside him stood his siblings, each a pillar. Of divine power Hera, his queen, radiant and proud. Poseidon, lord of the restless seas. Hades, ruler of the shadowed underworld. Demeter, the nurturing earth. And Hestia, the gentle hearth. But Olympus was not merely a place of serenity. It was a realm of passions and rivalries, where gods feasted. In golden halls and the fates of mortals were whispered upon the winds. The muses sang of heroism, while the fates wove the threads of destiny, their spindle turning with the rise and fall of empires. Below, the world blossomed under the gods' watchful eyes, a realm of beauty and terror, joy and sorrow, yet even in this paradise, conflict was never far. The gods were beings of immense power, but also of pride, jealousy, and desire. Zeus's. Thunder could shake the heavens, but his own heart was not immune to longing. His many loves, divine and mortal, wove a tapestry of tales, of heroes and monsters, of love and betrayal. Beneath their immortal splendor, the gods mirrored the passions of the mortals who worshipped them. And though they dwelled upon Olympus, they were forever tied to the world below. Their myths spread across the land, whispered by shepherds in the mountains, sung by sailors on the wine-dark sea. The world was a theater, and the gods were its eternal audience, Prometheus and the gift. Of fire yet, the gods were not alone. Far below their golden halls, humanity wandered the earth, a frail, shivering race, fearful of the darkness and the cold. They had no warmth, no light, no knowledge of the world's secrets. But one among the Titans saw their suffering. Prometheus, the fire-bringer, looked upon humanity with pity. Defying Zeus's command, Prometheus climbed the sacred heights of Olympus. With a burning branch stolen from the chariot of the sun, he gifted fire to mankind. A single spark, yet it changed everything. The darkness fled, and warmth spread across the earth. Humanity learned to craft, to cook, to shape metal, and to dream, but Zeus's wrath was swift and terrible. For this defiance, Prometheus was seized and bound to a desolate mountainside. Each day, an eagle descended to tear at his flesh, and each night his wounds healed, only for the torment to begin anew. Yet Prometheus did not wail in despair. His suffering was a beacon, a symbol of the human spirit, defiant, enduring, ever reaching for the light, echoes of myths in the mortal world. The stories of the gods were more than mere tales. They were the heartbeat of a people, the whispered prayers of shepherds on misty hills, the songs of sailors as the stars guided their journeys. Around the flickering fires, the Greeks wove these myths into the fabric of their lives. in the shade of olive groves, elders spoke of Zeus's thunder and Hera's vengeance. The seas whispered of Poseidon's wrath, and the mountains loomed like silent witnesses to ancient battles. Myth was the soul of Greece, a world where the divine walked among mortals, where heroes rose and fell, and where even the stars were but the traces of ancient legends. The dawn of myth was the dawn of Greece itself. And as the first villages gathered around sacred springs, the whispers of the gods became the voice of a civilization, a voice that would echo through the ages. Chapter 2. The Age of Heroes. As the world settled beneath the watchful gaze of Olympus, the age of gods began to wane, making way for a new epoch, the Age of Heroes. It was a time when the divine touched the mortal, when men and women reached beyond their human frailty to become something more. Heroes were not merely men of strength or skill. They were symbols of courage, perseverance, and sacrifice. Their stories wove through the valleys and mountains of Greece, whispered by the winds and sung by the bards. The first whispers of this age were like the soft rustling of olive leaves under a golden sun. Names like Perseus, who soared upon winged sandals to slay the Gorgon, and Bellerophon, who tamed the divine steed Pegasus, shimmered like distant stars in the Greek sky. But beyond the feats and battles, it was their flaws, their struggles, and their humanity that made them heroes. For in this world, where gods watched from their thrones on Olympus, the true test of greatness lay not in might, but in choice. The choice to confront monsters, both within and without. The choice to defy fate, even when it seemed unyielding. The choice to sacrifice for those who could not defend themselves. It was an age when a hero was measured not by their victories, but by their willingness to suffer for a cause greater than themselves. From the rocky crags of Thessaly to the sunlit shores of Crete, their tales spread stories of courage that danced upon the lips of storytellers, that warmed the hearts of warriors and whispered hope to the downtrodden. And among these stories, some shone brighter than others, their heroes towering above the rest, not just in strength, but in spirit. Hercules. Strength and sacrifice. Amid these heroes stood one whose name would echo through eternity, Hercules, the mighty son of Zeus. Yet for all his strength, his life was a tapestry of suffering. Born of the union between Zeus, the king of gods, and Alcmene, a mortal woman, Hercules was a being caught between two worlds. His strength was his gift, but also his burden. From the moment of his birth, his life was shadowed by the wrath of Hera, the queen of the gods, whose jealousy burned like an eternal flame. In her fury, she sent serpents to his cradle, but even as an infant, Hercules crushed them with his tiny, unyielding hands. Yet Hera's vengeance was not so easily sated. As Hercules grew, her hatred only deepened. It was Hera's curse that led to his greatest tragedy. In a moment of divine madness, a mist clouded his mind, and Hercules, mighty and fierce, struck down those he loved most, his wife and his children. When the mist lifted and his senses returned, he beheld the horror of his deeds, and grief overwhelmed him. Strength could shatter mountains, but it could not mend a broken heart. Seeking redemption for his unspeakable crime, Hercules turned to the oracle of Delphi. Her voice, cold and distant, pronounced his sentence. He would serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae, who would set him 12 labors. Each would test his strength, but more than that, they would test his spirit, from slaying the Nemean lion with its invulnerable hide to capturing the golden hind of Artemis, from facing the 9-headed Hydra, whose heads multiplied with each strike. To cleansing the vast stables of King Aegeus in a single day, each task was a battle not just against monsters, but against his own guilt. His final labor saw him descend into the shadowed depths of Hades to capture Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed guardian of the underworld. But even here, in the realm of the dead, Hercules did not falter. Hercules became a legend, not merely because of his strength, but because of his suffering, his perseverance, and his unyielding spirit. His tale was a reminder that greatness was not in being without flaw, but in rising above them. Theseus and the labyrinth of Crete, while Hercules fought against monsters, another hero stood against the darkness of human fear. Theseus, prince of Athens, was a hero not just of strength, but of cunning and courage. His legend was born not in the mountains of Greece, but in the shadow of a great and dreadful labyrinth dot in the grand palace of Knossos, beneath the sun-drenched hills of Crete. King Minos reigned. Yet within his palace lay a secret labyrinth, a twisted maze of endless passages and shadowed corridors. At its heart lurked the Minotaur, a beast born of shame, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. And each year, the youth of Athens were sent to this labyrinth as a tribute and offering to sate the beast's hunger, but Theseus would not stand idle. With a heart bold and a spirit unyielding, he volunteered to be among the sacrificial youths, not as a victim, but as a savior. Arriving in Crete, he met Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, who fell in love with his courage. And it was she who gifted him the thread a simple coil of string, a lifeline in the darkness into the labyrinth. He ventured, each step swallowed by shadow, his only guide the thread that unraveled behind him. The air was thick and stale, the silence broken only by his own breath. And then, in the heart of the darkness, he faced the Minotaur. The beast roared, a thunderous bellow that shook the stone walls. But Theseus did not waver. With skill and courage, he struck down the creature, and with Ariadne's thread, he found his way back. Yet his heroism was not merely in slaying the beast. It was in facing the darkness of fear, the darkness of despair, and the darkness of the labyrinth that was as much a prison of the mind as it was of stone. Jason and the quest for the golden fleece beyond the Aegean, where the sea met the distant horizon. Another hero sailed upon the waves, Jason, the leader of the Argonauts. His quest was one of ambition, a journey to seize the golden fleece, a prize of divine power guarded by a serpent in the distant land of Colchis aboard. The Argo, his ship of legend, Jason was not alone. Around him gathered the greatest heroes of Greece, Orpheus, whose music could soothe the soul of even the gods, Atalanta, the swift huntress, and Hercules himself. But Jason was not a warrior like Hercules, nor a trickster like Theseus. His heroism lay in his leadership in uniting heroes of such might and pride. Their journey was a saga of peril and wonder. They faced the clashing rocks of the Symplegades, whose jaws crushed ships like dry leaves. They crossed treacherous seas where sirens sang of doom, their voices as sweet death. And in Colchis, Jason won the fleece not with strength, but with cunning, aided by the sorceress Medea, who loved him, but heroism is a fragile thing. Even as Jason held the golden fleece in his hands, fate's shadow fell upon him. His love with Medea would end in tragedy. His ambition turned to ashes, and the golden promise of his quest would fade into regret. The world of heroes was not a realm of happy endings, but of dreams and heartbreaks, the Trojan War, glory and tragedy. But no tale of heroes would be complete without the greatest of them all, the War of Troy. It began with a single face, Helen, whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. It was a war of kings and champions, Agamemnon, the proud commander; Menelaus, the forsaken husband; Achilles, the peerless warrior whose rage was a tempest; and Odysseus, the wily strategist whose cunning could outwit even the gods. For 10 years the Greeks and Trojans clashed beneath the shadow of Troy's towering walls. The gods watched from Olympus, choosing sides, their divine whims shaping mortal fates. Achilles' wrath was a storm, his spear a lightning bolt. But even he was not invincible. An arrow to his heel would bring the mightiest of warriors to his knees, yet in the end, it was not strength that conquered Troy, but guile. A wooden horse, a gift of deceit, breached the unbreakable walls. Troy burned, and the heroes who sought glory found only ash and sorrow. The age of heroes was an age of glory, but also of loss. A time when greatness and suffering were but two sides of the same coin. Chapter 3: The Rise of the Polis. As the dust of myth settled and the echoes of heroism began to fade, a quiet transformation swept across the rugged hills and scattered islands of Greece, where once there were only isolated villages huddled in the shadow of mountains or nestled by the edge of the sea. Something new began to take shape. Small settlements drew closer, neighbors became allies, and alliances turned into a shared identity. This was the birth of the polis, the city-state. The land of Greece was a world divided by nature itself. Mountains rose like silent guardians, separating one valley from another. The seas stretched vast and glittering, their waves a barrier and a highway. But this very fragmentation, which might have divided lesser peoples, became a crucible for the Greeks. In their isolation, each polis grew not as a part of a greater whole, but as a world unto itself. Athens, with its fertile plains of Attica, found prosperity in trade and the silver mines of Laurium. Its people became merchants, sailors, and artisans, their city bustling with life and commerce. Sparta, by contrast, nestled in the rugged valley of Laconia, turned inward, forging a society of warriors. Corinth, perched between two seas, thrived as a hub of commerce, its ships venturing far and wide. Thebes rose in the shadow of Mount Cytheron, a city of farmers and soldiers, proud and fierce, yet the polis was more than just walls and buildings. It was a community, a shared spirit, a sense of belonging. Each city-state had its own gods, its own heroes, and its own laws. In Athens, citizens would gather in the Agora, debating the fate of their city under the open sky. In Sparta, young boys were trained to endure hardship, to fight and die for their homeland. And as the cities grew, so too did their ambitions. They were rivals, each vying for honor and greatness, yet beneath their differences, they were all bound by the same Hellenic soul. Athens, the cradle of democracy in the plains of Attica, beneath a sky often painted in soft hues of orange and gold, Athens began to rise. It was a city of olive groves and bustling markets, of ships that danced upon the waves of the Aegean, bringing goods from distant lands. But the true gift of Athens to the world was not in its wealth or its marble temples. It was in an idea, a dream that power should belong to the people. This dream was called democracy, Athens was not born a democracy. It was a city that, like any other, was ruled by kings, and later by a wealthy aristocracy. But the winds of change began to blow through its streets. The first stirrings came with Solon, a wise lawmaker who, in the darkness of inequality, became a beacon of hope. He reformed the laws, easing the burden on the poor and breaking the grip of the powerful. Debt slavery was abolished, and a new council, the bull, gave voice to the citizens. Yet it was not enough. Change came slowly, like a river carving its way through stone. The next great step came under Cleisthenes, who is often called the father of Athenian democracy. He divided the city into tribes, not by birth, but by residence, breaking the old power of the noble families. The assembly, or ecclesia, became the heart of the city, where free male citizens could speak, debate, and vote God in the Agra. Beneath the shade of towering columns, Athenians would gather. Merchants, farmers, soldiers, and philosophers all could speak. All could shape the future. It was not a perfect system. Women, slaves, and foreigners had no voice. But for those who could speak, it was a chance to shape their world. Athens became a city of ideas, of debate and discourse, a place where thoughts could soar as freely as the seabirds over Piraeus, Sparta, the warrior's domain, but to the south, in the shadow of the Taygetus Mountains, a different kind of city, rose Sparta, a place where strength was law, and discipline was a way of life. Where Athens valued debate, Sparta honored silence. Where Athenians spoke of freedom, Spartans spoke of duty. Sparta was a city of warriors. Its origins were humble. A collection of villages that merged beneath the iron discipline of a single code. This code was forged by Lycurgus, the lawgiver. Legend said that Lycurgus was a man who traveled the world, seeking wisdom from distant lands. But when he returned to Sparta, he saw not wealth or luxury as the path to greatness, but discipline and unity. His laws, known as the Great Rhetora, were simple but absolute. In Sparta, every citizen was a soldier. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7, entering the agoge, a brutal training regimen that stripped away weakness and forged them into warriors. They learned to endure hunger, to fight with bare hands, to stand fearless in the face of death. Even the women of Sparta were strong, raised to be the mothers of warriors, their spirits as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded their city. Sparta had no walls, for its citizens were its defense. And though it was a city that lacked the marble splendor of Athens or the bustling ports of Corinth, it was a city that feared no enemy. Its warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, bound not by chains, but by honor. Their shields were their pride, and their lives were dedicated to the state. They lived and died by a single, unyielding creed, strength above all, the sacred games and shared traditions. Yet, even in their fierce rivalry, the Greek city-states were bound together by something greater. They were all Hellenes, children of Hellas, and they shared a culture, a language, and a pantheon of gods. And in the sacred sanctuary of Olympia, beneath the gaze of Zeus, they laid down their arms and gathered in peace. The Olympic Games were more than a contest of strength and skill. They were a celebration of unity. Every 4 years, athletes from across the Hellenic world gathered to compete. Runners dashed beneath the summer sun, their feet pounding the dust of the sacred track. Wrestlers grappled, their bodies gleaming with oil, their muscles straining in the struggle for victory. Chariots thundered around the hippodrome, their wheels spinning in a blur of speed, but the games were also a time of sacred peace. A truce was declared, and even the fiercest of enemies laid down their arms to honor the gods. Victors were crowned, not with gold or silver, but with simple olive wreaths, a symbol of honor that would outlast any treasure. For those who won, their names would be sung, their deeds remembered. For those who lost, there was the solace of having competed in the sacred arena, but beyond the athletic feats, the Olympics were a reminder of a greater truth, that the Greeks, for all their rivalries, were one people. And in the shadow of the sacred temples, in the cheers of the crowd and the songs of the poets, that unity shone like a beacon, the birth of the classical world. As the city-states flourished, the Greek world began to bloom. Colonies sprang up along the coasts of the Aegean, the Black Sea, and beyond, carrying Greek language, art, and thought to distant shores. From the bustling port of Miletus to the shining streets of Syracuse, the Hellenic spirit spread, a vast constellation of city-states united by culture, but each shining with its own light dot. In Athens, philosophers gathered in the Agora, questioning the nature of existence, of justice, of the soul itself. In Sparta, warriors trained beneath the watchful eyes of their elders, their every breath a testament to strength and honor. In Corinth, merchants sailed across the wine-dark sea, their ships bringing the wealth of distant lands, but beneath the wealth, the power, and the glory, the city-states were fragile. Their unity was a dream, always threatened by the jealousies and ambitions of their leaders. Yet it was this very tension, this constant struggle between freedom and order, between rivalry and unity, that forged the Greek world into something greater than the sum of its parts. The age of the polis was an age of brilliance, an age of heroes and thinkers, of warriors and poets. A time when a people divided by mountains and seas were united by the stars of a shared sky. Chapter 4. The Persian Threat Beyond the Blue Waters of the Aegean, beneath the vast skies where the sun rose in a golden blaze, a shadow stretched from the east. It was the shadow of an empire so vast that its edges touched the deserts of Egypt and the mountains of India. This was Persia, a land of mighty kings, grand palaces, and endless armies. In its heart, the great King Darius sat upon his golden throne, a sovereign whose gaze turned ever westward towards the scattered Greek. City-states, what began as a distant murmur soon became a thunderous storm. The spark was lit in the city of Miletus, where Greeks under Persian rule dared to defy the great king. This was the Ionian revolt, a cry for freedom that echoed across the Aegean. The Greeks of Ionia, with their city walls and coastal harbors, rose in rebellion. They sought aid from their kin across the sea, and Athens, a city of courage and ambition, answered the call. Together, they struck against Persia, even daring to set fire to the great city of Sardis. But such defiance did not go unnoticed. Darius, the ruler of a world-spanning empire, saw this as an affront, not just to his rule, but to his honor. He swore vengeance upon those who had dared to challenge him. The rebellion was crushed, its cities burned, its people scattered. But the flame of defiance had not been extinguished. It had merely been kindled. As Darius gazed westward, he saw more than just islands and mountains. He saw a land of free men who bowed to no king, who fought not for gold or conquest, but for their homes and their honor. And so, with the weight of an empire behind him, Darius ordered his armies to march, his fleets to sail. The winds of conquest swept over the Aegean, and the Persian threat was no longer a distant whisper. It was a storm, a shadow that darkened the Greek horizon. Marathon, the first clash in the year 490 BCE, beneath a sky of endless blue, the winds of war brought Persian ships to the shores of Marathon. The golden sands of the beach shuddered beneath. The weight of a vast host warriors in silken robes, archers whose arrows could blot out the sun, cavalry that moved like thunder. They came as conquerors, with the banners of Persia fluttering like dark clouds in the breeze, but Greece did not tremble. Athens, that city of poets and philosophers, answered the call to arms. The citizens took up their shields and spears, leaving. Behind the bustling agora, the shaded olive groves, and the sunlit Parthenon. Led by their general Miltiades, they marched to meet the invaders. They were outnumbered, a mere force of 10,000 against a horde. Yet in their hearts burned a fierce fire, the fire of freedom. On the plain of Marathon, the two armies stood face to face. The Greeks formed their phalanx a wall of shields, a forest of spears. Beneath the shadow of the mountains, they waited, the sun glinting off their bronze armor. And then, with a cry that echoed across the fields, they charged. The clash was like thunder. The Persians, accustomed to breaking their enemies with arrows and cavalry, were stunned by the Greek phalanx. The Athenians drove forward, their spears. Plunging through the enemy ranks, their shields locked like an unyielding wall. Step by step, they pushed the invaders back, their courage a force as unbreakable as steel. When the dust settled, the field was strewn with the fallen, and the Persians, who had come as conquerors, fled to their ships. It was a victory beyond hope, a triumph against all odds. And as the sun dipped towards the horizon, a lone runner named Pheidippides raced towards Athens. His feet pounded the earth, his breath came in gasps, but he ran with a single purpose. Bursting into the city, he cried, "Victory!" before collapsing, his spirit fleeing as his message was delivered. Marathon was more than a battle, it was a legend. Thermopylae, the heroic stand, but the hunger of Persia was not sated. 10 years later, the shadow returned, darker and vaster than before. This time, it was not Darius, but his son, Xerxes, who led the Persian host. A host so vast that it was said the sea itself shrank before their ships, and the earth trembled beneath their march. Greece stood once more on the brink of darkness, but even in the face of such a storm, there were those who would not yield. At a narrow pass known as Thermopylae, where the mountains kissed the sea, a small force of Greeks chose to make a stand. At their head was Leonidas, king of Sparta, a man whose courage shone like a beacon. 300 Spartans stood with him, each a warrior raised from birth to fight, to endure, to die with honor. They were joined by allies, men of Thespiae and Thebes, but it was the Spartans who were the heart of this defiant stand. For 3 days they held the pass. Beneath the rain of arrows, against the endless waves of Persian warriors, they stood as a wall of bronze and iron. Come back with your shield, or on it, their mothers had told them, for to a Spartan there was no greater glory than to die for the city. And they did not falter. Even as Persian arrows darkened the sky, even as the ground was soaked with the blood of their comrades, they stood. They fought in the shadow of the mountains, there. Courage a light that pierced the darkness, But betrayal came in the guise of a twisted path, a hidden pass revealed by a traitor. The Persians surrounded them, but the Spartans did not flee. Leonidas fell, his warriors falling around him, each one a testament to defiance. They died, but in their death they became legends. Thermopylae was not a victory, it was a beacon. A reminder that freedom was worth any price. Salamis, the tide turns with the fall of Thermopylae. The Persians swept south, burning Athens, the city of light and wisdom. But even as the flames rose against the sky, the Greeks were not defeated. Beneath the leadership of Themistocles, an Athenian of cunning and vision, they turned to the sea dot in the narrow straits of Salamis. Themistocles laid his trap. The Persian, fleet, vast and unwieldy, surged forward, their pride as great as their numbers. But the Greeks knew these waters, their triremes swift, nimble warships darting like sharks among the lumbering Persian vessels. The Persians crowded the straits, their ships colliding in chaos, their oars entangled. And in that confusion the Greeks struck. The Athenian triremes crashed into the enemy, their bronze-clad prows shattering hulls, their rowers driving them forward with the strength of desperation. The sea became a graveyard, the waters littered. With burning ships, with the cries of the drowning mingling with the roar of battle, Xerxes watched from his golden throne atop a cliff, his pride crumbling with each shattered ship. The might of Persia, so vast on land, was helpless in the narrow embrace of the sea. And as the sun set, the tide of the war turned. The Greeks had not just survived, they had triumphed. The legacy of the Persian wars, the Persian threat, was more than a test of arms. It was a crucible that forged a new sense of unity among the Greek city-states. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and Thebes had stood together, however briefly, against a common foe. In the shadow of Persian might, they had glimpsed the power of unity, but the war left more than ruins and ashes. It left a sense of pride, a belief that free men, standing side by side, could defy even the greatest of empires. The stories of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis became legends, whispered in the agoras and sung by the bards. They were stories of courage, of sacrifice, of a people who chose to stand, even when hope was faint. From the ashes of those battles, a new age would rise. An age of brilliance and beauty, but also of rivalry and ambition. The Greeks had learned the power of unity, but they had also learned the taste of victory. The seeds of greatness had been sown, and in the light of that newfound pride, they would soon blossom. Chapter 5. The Golden Age of Athens in the aftermath of the Persian Wars. The city of Athens stood beneath the clear, sunlit sky, its walls intact, its spirit unbroken. Once a city humbled by the fires of invasion, it now rose like a phoenix, its resolve transformed into ambition. And at the heart of this transformation was Pericles, a statesman of vision, a leader who saw in Athens not just a city, but a beacon of civilization. Pericles was not a warrior nor a king, but his influence stretched far beyond the battlefield. He was a voice in the assembly, a force in the agora, and a dreamer who dared to see Athens as the heart of a great cultural empire. His vision was one of beauty, wisdom, and power. He believed that a city should be judged not just by the strength of its walls or the size of its armies, but by the brilliance of its ideas. Under Pericles, Athens became a city of marble and light. Upon the sacred rock of the Acropolis, the Parthenon rose, a temple of white stone dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. Its columns soared towards the heavens, and within its halls, the great sculptor Phidias crafted a towering statue of Athena, her form radiant with gold and ivory. The Parthenon was more than a temple. It was a symbol of Athens' pride, a testament to its faith, its artistry, and its ambition. But Pericles' vision extended beyond marble and gold. He championed democracy, a system where every citizen, at least every free Athenian man, could stand in the assembly, speak his mind, and cast his vote. It was an idea that seemed fragile in a world ruled by kings and tyrants, yet in Athens it flourished. Pericles ensured that even the poorest could participate, for he introduced pay for public service, allowing even the humblest laborer to serve the state without fear of hunger. Beneath Pericles, Athens was not just a city. It was a symbol of light that shone across the Aegean. But the light that dazzled also cast shadows, shadows that would one day grow long and dark, the birth of drama and philosophy. Yet the true greatness of Athens was not measured in marble temples, but in the brilliance of its people, in the shadow of the Acropolis, where the olive trees whispered in the breeze. A new form of art was born: drama. The theater of Dionysus, an open-air amphitheater nestled against the slopes, became a place where the human soul was laid bare. It was here that Aeschylus, the father of tragedy, spun his tales of fate and the wrath of gods. His plays were not mere stories. They were mirrors held to the human heart, reflecting courage, pride, and suffering. Sophocles followed, his words exploring the tragic heroism of Oedipus, a king doomed by fate, yet noble in his fall. And then came Euripides, whose characters were not gods or heroes, but men and women torn by love, jealousy, and despair. Beyond the stage, beneath the porticos of the Agora, another kind of drama unfolded, the drama of thought. A barefoot philosopher wandered the crowded square, his voice a quiet murmur amid the noise. This was Socrates, a man who questioned everything, who believed that wisdom was not in knowing, but in understanding the depth of one's own ignorance. Socrates had no grand temple, no scrolls of philosophy, only questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What does it mean to live a good life? His questioning was a flame that sparked the minds of those who listened. Among them was Plato, his student, who would capture his master's thoughts in dialogues. And beyond Plato came Aristotle, a thinker whose curiosity knew no bounds, exploring nature, ethics, and the stars above. Athens was a city of stone, but its true wealth lay in the minds of its people. Ideas flowed like a river, washing over the city, leaving behind a legacy that would ripple through history. Drama and philosophy, these were the twin flames that lit the soul of Athens, the Delian League, power and ambition. Yet Athens was not content to shine in isolation. Its power reached beyond its walls, stretching across the islands and coasts of the Aegean. What began as an alliance of city-states, a union of equals standing together against Persia, soon became an empire in all but name. This was the Delian League, an alliance where Athens stood as leader, its navy patrolling the waves like a shadow dot in the beginning. It was a union forged in fear, a promise of mutual defense. The member states contributed ships and money, their wealth stored on the sacred island of Delos. But as the years passed, Athens' grip tightened. The League's treasury was moved to Athens, and what had been a partnership became a dominion. Tribute, flowed into the city, filling its coffers with silver, which Pericles used to build temples, to pay citizens for their service, to adorn the city in marble and gold. But beneath the glittering faud, resentment brewed. For the smaller city-states, the league became a cage. Those who tried to leave were crushed, their fleets seized, their walls torn down. Athens called itself the protector of Greece, but to many, it was a tyrant in all but name. Yet even as it tightened its grip, Athens believed in its own greatness, a greatness measured not just in fleets or coins, but in culture, in wisdom, in the light it cast upon the world. Pericles saw his city as the school of Hellas, a place where every art, every idea could flourish. But the light of empire has its cost, and Athens would soon learn that even the brightest flame can cast a deep shadow. Athens, a city of contrasts, Athens, in its golden age, was a city of brilliance and contradiction. In the streets, merchants called out, their stalls brimming with silver, spices, and painted pottery. In the shadow of the Parthenon, the citizens debated laws, voted on matters of state, their voices a chorus of democracy. But beneath this shining surface, shadows lingered. It was a city where freedom was proclaimed in the assembly, yet slavery was an accepted fact of life. For every free citizen who cast his vote, there were women whose voices were silenced, slaves, who labored in the mines of Laurium. There lives a currency for Athenian wealth. Athens celebrated the beauty of the human form in its sculptures, yet its politics could be ruthless, its ambition unyielding. Even Pericles, the man whose vision had lifted Athens to greatness, could not escape the darkness. A plague swept through the city, a fever that struck without mercy. Rich and poor alike fell before it, and even Pericles, the man who had led Athens to glory, was claimed by the sickness. His death was more than a loss, it was a shadow upon the city, a reminder of the fragility of greatness. And as Athens flourished, as its temples rose, as its drama and philosophy touched the stars, a distant rumble could be heard. For in the south, in the shadow of the Taygetus mountains, another city watched with unease. Sparta, the city of warriors austere and proud, looked upon Athens not with admiration, but with suspicion. The two cities were as different as fire and ice, one a beacon of art and reason, the other a fortress of discipline and strength. Athens was a city of light, yet its brilliance cast shadows. Beneath the marble, beneath the ideals of freedom and wisdom, there was pride, there was ambition, and there was a tension that would soon tear Greece apart. The golden age of Athens was not a moment of peace, but a moment balanced on the edge of a knife, a light that burned so brightly it threatened to consume itself. Chapter 6. The Peloponnesian War. The brilliance of Athens was a light too radiant to be ignored. Rising from the ashes of the Persian wars, it had become a city of marble temples and bustling marketplaces, its navy ruling the Aegean, its wealth drawn from a vast network of allies in the Delian League. Ships laden with silver and grain filled its harbors, and philosophers walked the shaded porticos, their voices a gentle murmur beneath the warm sun. Yet beyond the mountains, in the south, another city watched with growing unease, Sparta. Unlike Athens, Sparta was a land of iron, a society of warriors raised from birth in the arts of discipline and war. Its citizens lived simply, trained relentlessly, and obeyed the ancient laws of Lycurgus, a lawgiver whose ghost seemed to linger in every Spartan heart. Sparta's greatness was not measured in gold or art, but in courage, in the quiet strength of men who valued honor above all. Athens, a democracy of merchants and thinkers, believed in freedom, debate, and the power of the voice. Sparta, an oligarchy of warriors trusted only in strength, in the silence of obedience. The two cities were like fire and ice, brilliant in their own ways, but utterly opposed. At first, they were allies, brothers in arms against the mighty Persian Empire. But the peace that followed victory soon revealed the depth of their differences. The Delian League, once a union of free states, had become an Athenian empire. Tribute flowed to Athens, and those who tried to leave were crushed. The gleaming Parthenon rose above the city, paid for by the wealth of unwilling allies. To Sparta, this was a betrayal. Athens, which spoke of freedom, now acted as a tyrant. And so the seeds of conflict were sown, rivalry turned to hostility, and in 431 BCE, war erupted. The Peloponnesian War had begun, a conflict that would tear Greece apart. The plague of Athens' war swept across the Hellenic world, and Athens, confident in the strength of its navy, withdrew behind its mighty walls. The city, surrounded by its long walls, stretched from the Acropolis to the bustling port of Piraeus. Inside, the Athenians believed themselves safe, their ships ruling the sea, their wealth sustaining them. But war is a cruel teacher, and it taught Athens a bitter lesson. For as the city crowded with refugees from the countryside, a new enemy slipped within its walls, a plague, unseen, unstoppable. It began with a fever, a dry, burning heat. Then came the coughing, the burning thirst that no water could quench, and a despair that seemed to seep into the soul. The streets of Athens became silent tombs. Bodies lay unburied, stacked in the temples, the cries of the dying a constant echo. Beneath the city's marble grandeur, even Pericles, the great leader who had led Athens to its golden age, fell to the sickness. His voice, which had once stirred the assembly, was silenced. His vision of a shining Athens seemed to die with him. The city was gripped by fear, and with fear came chaos. Laws were forgotten, temples were abandoned, and the people turned to desperation. The light of Athens, which had once dazzled the world, now flickered in the shadow of death. The city of wisdom became a city of suffering, and outside the walls, Sparta waited. The warriors of the Peloponnesian League marched, while the Athenians struggled not against men, but against death itself. The plague was a reminder that no wall, no fleet, could guard against the capricious hand of fate, the Sicilian. Disaster, but even as the plague ravaged Athens, the city did not yield. Its ships still sailed the Aegean, its ambitions still burned. And in their desperation, the Athenians looked west, across the sea, to the island of Sicily, a land of fertile fields, of rich cities, and of promised dot. In 415 BCE, Athens launched an ambitious expedition against Sicily, seeking to conquer the great city of Syracuse. It was a venture born of hope, of greed, and of pride. The fleet that sailed was vast, a gleaming armada of triremes, their bronze rams shining beneath the sun. Thousands of soldiers marched, their banners dancing in the sea breeze. It was a vision of Athenian might, a spectacle of power, but Sicily was a distant land, and ambition is a dangerous companion. As the Athenian fleet reached the island, they found not a land eager to submit, but a city ready to resist. Syracuse stood defiant, its walls strong, its defenders fierce. And as the Athenian siege dragged on, the invaders found themselves outmatched. The turning point came when Sparta sent aid to Syracuse. The Athenian fleet, once the master of the seas, was shattered. The soldiers who had dreamed of victory found themselves surrounded, hunted through the treacherous Sicilian countryside. Those who were captured were thrown into the quarries, left to die beneath the blazing sun. Athens had gambled everything and lost. The expedition ended not in glory, but in disaster. The Sicilian venture became a wound deep, festering wound from which Athens would never fully recover. Its ships were lost, its soldiers slain, and its pride shattered. Sparta's victory and Athenian defeat, the disaster in Sicily left Athens weak, but it did not yet bring defeat. The city still stood, its walls unbroken, its spirit defiant. But Sparta, seeing its enemy weakened, sought new allies. Across the dusty plains of Persia, the great king watched with interest. Gold flowed from Persia to Sparta, and with that gold, Sparta built a fleet that could challenge Athens on the waves. Led by the brilliant general Lysander, the Spartan fleet swept across the Aegean. At the Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BCE, the Athenian navy was caught off guard, its ships burned, its sailors slain. Athens, the city of ships, was left without a navy. Its harbors lay silent, its walls encircled by Spartan spears. In 404 BCE, after nearly 3 decades of war, Athens surrendered. The long walls, once a symbol of its power, were torn down to the sound of Spartan flutes. Its empire crumbled, its treasury emptied. The city that had once led Greece now knelt in defeat, but Sparta's victory was not a triumph. Greece itself lay shattered, its city-states exhausted, its people weary of war. The dream of Hellenic unity, once kindled against Persia, was now a distant memory. Sparta, the victor, found itself struggling to maintain control, its strength sapped by the very war it had won, and beyond the mountains of the north, a new power stirred a kingdom that watched and waited, a kingdom that would one day unite the fractured Greek world. The age of city-states was ending, and the shadow of Macedon would soon fall upon the Hellenic world. The ashes of glory, the Peloponnesian War had ended, but the wounds it left behind were deep. Athens, once a beacon of wisdom and freedom, was now a humbled city, its fleet scattered, its walls broken. But even in defeat, the spirit of Athens did not die. The philosophers still wandered the agora, the dramas still echoed from the stone seats of the theater of Dionysus. The light of learning, though dimmed, was not extinguished. Sparta, the city of warriors, stood victorious, but it was a victory, tainted with bitterness. Its rigid discipline, once a source of strength, now seemed a chain. It could crush Athens, but it could not rule Greece. Its allies grew resentful, its power began to wane. The dream of Spartan dominance was a dream, born of blood, and it too would fade. Greece was a land of ashes, ashes of burned cities, of broken oaths, of forgotten dreams. Yet beneath those ashes, the embers of Hellenic culture still glowed. For Greece was more than walls, more than fleets. It was a spirit, a fire that no war could ever truly extinguish. And as the city-states quarreled, as Sparta tried to hold what it had won, the mountains of the north whispered of a new age, of a new power that would soon sweep across the Greek world. The ashes of glory were but the soil from which a new legend would rise. Chapter 7. The rise of Thebes in the shadow of the Peloponnesian War. Greece lay fractured, a land of weary cities and bruised pride. Athens, the once shining beacon of wisdom and art, had been humbled, its walls torn down, its navy scattered. Sparta, the city of warriors, stood victorious but strained, its rigid society buckling under the weight of its own victories. The great powers of Hellas were now shadows of their former selves, and in the void they left behind, the winds of ambition stirred amid this chaos. A new power began to rise, a city once seen as a mere pawn in the games of greater states. Thebes, nestled in the fertile plains of Boeotia, had long been overlooked, its name whispered only as a place of old myths and tragic stories. But Thebes would not remain a quiet city. A new generation of leaders looked beyond its walls, dreaming of something greater. At their head stood Epaminondas, a man of vision and virtue, a general who saw in Thebes not just a city, but a beacon of freedom. He was a scholar and a warrior, a man who spoke of justice, but knew the bitter taste of war. Under his guidance, Thebes would step from the shadows and into the light of history. Thebes was not like Athens, with its bustling agora and silver-filled coffers. Nor was it like Sparta, where iron discipline and unyielding laws shaped every soul. Thebes was a land of farmers, its strength drawn from the earth and its people. But it was also a city of fighters, and in this time of turmoil, it would become a city of conquerors. Epaminondas spoke of a new Greece, a Greece where the strong would not prey upon the weak, where the cities could be free of tyranny. And to make this dream a reality, he prepared Thebes for war. For in this age of fractured power, only strength could carve a path to freedom. The sacred band, warriors of Thebes at the heart of Theban power, stood a force like no other. The sacred band, an elite unit of 300 warriors. The sacred band was a brotherhood of fighters bound not just by duty, but by love. Each soldier fought alongside their chosen companion, their bond deepened by the trust of those who loved not just their city, but each other. The concept was bold, even radical, for it defied the traditional norms of war. In the sacred band, bravery was born of devotion. No man would flee the field, for to do so would mean abandoning the one he cherished most. This was not just a military tactic, it was a bond of the heart, a vow of courage sealed not with words but with love. Their armor shone in the sun, their spears sharp as truth. They trained together, lived together, and when battle came, they fought as one. No enemy could shake their resolve, for they did not fight merely for Thebes or for glory. They fought for each other, their hearts a fortress stronger than any wall. Under the command of Epaminondas, the sacred band became a legend. Their mere presence on the battlefield struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. To face them was to face men who feared nothing, not death, not defeat, for their greatest fear was losing each other. The story of the sacred band was not just a tale of war, but of courage, of devotion, and of the quiet strength that comes from love. And in this strength, Thebes found its might, a force that would soon shake the world. The Battle of Leuctrane, the summer of 371 BCE, the armies of Greece gathered on a plain near the town of Leuctra. On one side stood the Spartan phalanx, a wall of iron and muscle, the pride of a city that had ruled the land through fear and strength. On the other stood the Thebans, led by Epaminondas, their hearts burning with a quiet determination. Sparta had never known defeat in open battle. Its warriors, raised from childhood in the arts of war, stood like a wall of bronze, their shields locked, their spears ready. They were the masters of Greece, the legends of the battlefield, and to them, this would be just another victory. But Epaminondas had a plan. He did not seek to fight Sparta in the traditional way. Instead, he broke with convention, arranging his troops in a deep oblique formation. His strongest soldiers, the sacred band, stood on the left, a hammer poised, to strike. The Spartans, confident in their unbroken tradition of victory, did not see the storm gathering before them. The battle began, and the Theban left wing surged forward. The sacred band, led by Epaminondas, crashed into the Spartan right. The weight of the Theban assault was overwhelming, a thunderous wave that shattered the Spartan line. For the first time in centuries, Spartan warriors turned and fled. As the dust settled, the impossible had happened. Sparta, the city of warriors, had been defeated. Its pride lay broken on the field of Leuctra, and with it, the myth of its invincibility. Thebes had not only won a battle, it had changed the course of Greek history. Leuctra was more than a victory. It was a message, a declaration that the old world was fading, and a new one was being born. And at the heart of this new world stood Thebes, the hegemony of Thebason. The wake of Leuctra, Thebes rose to become the dominant power in Greece. Its armies marched across the land, freeing cities once crushed beneath Spartan rule. The boar-headed banners of Thebes fluttered in the wind, and the voice of Epaminondas became a beacon of hope for those who had suffered under the iron hand of Sparta. But power is a fickle friend. What had begun as a quest for freedom soon became a struggle for dominance. Thebes, which had once spoken of justice, now demanded obedience. Its generals, once heroes, became rulers, and its allies, once brothers in arms, grew resentful. Epaminondas marched south, even into the heart of the Peloponnese, a place where no Theban army had ever dared to tread. He liberated the Helots, the oppressed serfs of Sparta, and built the city of Mycenaean as a bastion of freedom. His vision was of a Greece where all cities could be free. But even as he marched, the shadows of envy and ambition followed. For Thebes, the years of glory were brief, a flicker of brilliance in a world forever hungry for power. Epaminondas stood at the peak of his dream, but he knew in his heart that the dream could not last. The fall of Thebes in 362 BCE on the fields of Mantinea, Thebes fought one last great battle. Once again, Epaminondas led his men, his voice a call of courage, his presence a shield. But in the chaos of the fight, as the spears clashed and the banners waved, he fell. A Spartan spear pierced his chest, and with his dying breath, he asked if Thebes had won. When his men whispered yes, a faint smile touched his lips, and his eyes closed forever. But though Thebes had won the battle, it had lost its heart. Epaminondas was gone, and with him, the dream of a just and free Greece. Thebes, which had risen so quickly, now began to fade. Rivals encircled it. Old enemies found new strength, and the brilliance of Thebes dimmed the sacred band, once a symbol of unity. And love fell at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, crushed beneath the might of a new force, Macedonia. The men who had fought for each other, who had bled side by side, lay still beneath the silent sky. Thebes became just another city, its glory a memory, its name a whisper on the wind. But the story of Thebes was not just one of power and fall. It was a tale of courage, of love, and of dreams that dared to challenge the world, and as the stars shone over the fields of Greece, the spirit of Thebes lived on, a reminder that even the briefest light can burn brightly in the darkness. Chapter 8. The Rise of Macedon. To the north of the proud Greek city-states, beyond the rugged mountains and wild forests, lay Macedon. It was a land that the refined cities of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes viewed with a mix of disdain and indifference. To them, Macedon was a place of rough warriors, where kings ruled from simple halls, and men spoke in a dialect that seemed almost barbaric. But this disdain masked a dangerous ignorance. For beneath its rugged hills and shadowed valleys, Macedon was a sleeping giant. The Macedonians were a people of farmers and horsemen, a rugged folk who knew the value of hard labor and iron blades. Their kings were not distant figures, but warriors, who led their men into battle, their power resting on the loyalty of fierce nobles and a disciplined army. Yet for much of its history, Macedon remained a minor player, caught between the ambition of the Greek city-states to the south and the fierce tribes of Thrace and Illyria to the north. But in the mid-4th century BC, all of this began to change. For in this land of iron and forests, a king rose who saw what others could not. His name was Philip too. To many, he was just another barbarian king. But Philip was no ordinary ruler. He was a man of vision, a man who saw a world divided and believed it could be united. A man who saw Macedon not as a humble kingdom, but as the heart of a mighty empire. Philip had not always been a king. In his youth, he had been a hostage in Thebes, where he studied the ways of the Greek city-states, learning their strengths and their weaknesses. He watched their endless wars, their proud speeches, their rivalries. He saw how their brilliance was also their greatest flaw. Divided, they were vulnerable. United, they could be unstoppable. Returning to Macedon, Philip brought with him more than just memories. He brought a plan. He saw that if Macedon was to rise, it would need a new kind of strength. And so he began his great work, a work that would transform a kingdom of farmers into a power that would shake the world. Philip, too, the visionary King Philip, was not just a king. He was a strategist, a diplomat, a master of war. Under his command, the Macedonian army became something new, something deadly. At the heart of this transformation was the phalanx, a wall of spears and shields. But Philip's phalanx was unlike any the world had seen. Its soldiers carried the sarissa, a long spear nearly twice the length of those used by the Greek hoplites. With these, the Macedonian phalanx could strike at its enemies while remaining out of reach, but Philip's brilliance was not limited to the battlefield. He understood that war was not just about strength, it was about unity. He used marriage as a weapon, forging alliances with the fierce tribes of the north and the ambitious cities of the south. His court was a place of intrigue, where nobles who once plotted against the throne now found themselves bound by loyalty, wealth, and fear. Step by step, Philip expanded his influence. He crushed the tribes that had once harassed his borders, bringing them under his control. He seized the rich mines of Thrace, filling his treasury with silver. His armies marched south, not as invaders, but as protectors, offering the Greek cities a choice: join him willingly or face the spear. But it was not just fear that drew allies to Philip. Many saw in him a chance for peace, a chance to end the endless wars that had plagued Greece for generations. Even Athens, proud and defiant, found itself drawn into his orbit, for Philip did not speak of conquest, he spoke of unity. He spoke of a dream of a united Greece that would march not against each other, but against a greater foe, the mighty Persian Empire. The Battle of Chaerene's dream of unity met its first great test in 338 BCE on a dusty plain near the town of Chaeronea. There, the armies of Athens and Thebes, the last great defenders of Greek independence, gathered to resist Philip's advance. Their banners flew in the wind, their spears gleamed beneath the sun. This was the last stand of the free Greek cities, their final defiance against the man they called the barbarian king. But Philip's army was not just a horde of warriors. It was a force of discipline and precision, a machine forged by years, of training and tempered by war. At its heart stood the Macedonian phalanx, a wall of spears that stretched across the field. And beside Philip rode his son, Alexander, a young prince with the fire of ambition in his eyes. The battle began with the clash of shields and the roar of charging men. The Greeks fought bravely, their pride burning like a beacon. But Philip had prepared for this day. His phalanx struck like a hammer, the long spears driving into the Greek lines. And at the decisive moment, young Alexander, leading the Macedonian cavalry, crashed into the enemy's flank, scattering their ranks. The Greek alliance crumbled. Athens and Thebes, once the proudest cities of Greece, fell to their knees. The field of Chaeronea was not just a victory, it was a symbol that the old world of independent cities was ending. Greece had a new master, and that master was Macedon, but Philip was not a conqueror in the mold of tyrants. He did not raise the cities or punish their people. Instead, he offered them a place in his vision, a vision of unity, a vision of a Greece that would stand as one. And as the dust settled on the field, Philip's dream began to take shape. The dream of a united Greece that would march east to challenge the might of Persia. The assassination of Philip. Even as his dream grew, Philip's life was cut short. In 336 BCE, during a grand festival celebrating his daughter's marriage, Philip walked through the crowded theater of Aegae, his people cheering, the air alive with music and joy. But in a heartbeat, joy turned to horror. A figure burst from the crowd, a dagger flashing in the sunlight. Philip fell, his lifeblood staining the earth. Panic gripped the city. Who had killed the great king? Was it the work of a jealous lover, a bitter noble, or something darker, a plot from within? The truth was lost in whispers, in shadows that danced across the palace walls. But even as his body lay still, Philip's dream lived on, for there was another who carried that dream. His son, Alexander, young but fierce, brilliant yet ruthless. Trained by the great philosopher Aristotle, Alexander had learned the wisdom of Greece, but in his heart burned the fire of a warrior. Where Philip had dreamed, Alexander would act. Where Philip had spoken of unity, Alexander would forge an empire. The world had lost a king, but it had gained something far greater, a conqueror. The dawn of Alexander the Great, when the sun rose over Macedon, it rose on a new era. Alexander, just 20 years old, became king. Yet he was no mere boy, he was a lion, a warrior trained in the arts of battle and the wisdom of the great philosophers. His gaze did not linger on the fields of Macedon or the cities of Greece. His eyes turned east to the vast Persian Empire, a realm that stretched beyond the horizon for Alexander. Persia was not just a rival, it was a prize. A challenge that beckoned him, a chance to fulfill his father's dream and surpass it. He rallied his generals, called forth his armies, and with the voice of a king, declared his ambition, not just to conquer Persia, but to reshape the world. The land of the Greeks, once divided, now stood as one under his banner. And with the fire of youth and the wisdom of his teacher, Alexander began his march. A march that would lead him to the farthest edges of the world, from the green hills of Macedon to the golden palaces of Persia. His journey would be one of glory, of conquest, and of dreams made real. A new dawn had come, the dawn of Alexander the Great. Chapter 9. The conquests of Alexander the Great. The morning sun rose over the churning waters of the Hellespont, casting a golden glow upon the restless waves. Here, at this narrow strait separating Europe from Asia, history stood poised on the edge of a moment that would echo through the ages. A breeze whispered across the shore, stirring the banners of an army gathered under the shadow of their young king Alexander of Macedon. With each breath, the soldiers felt the weight of their king's ambition. This was not just a crossing of a river. It was a passage into legend. Standing at the water's edge, Alexander, barely 22, but already a figure of myth, raised his spear high. He cast it across the waves, watching as it struck the Asian shore. A proclamation carried by the wind. I claim Asia as my domain, and then they marched the Macedonian phalanx, a wall of disciplined warriors, their spears glinting like silver under the sun. Behind them came the cavalry, proud horsemen who would ride into history, and the allied Greeks, who marched not just for gold or glory, but for the promise of a dream of an empire without end. As their ships cut through the waters, as their feet touched the foreign soil, a sense of awe rippled through the men. They were following a man who believed himself not just a king, but a legend in the making. And in their hearts they believed it too, the Battle of the Granicus River. River Granicus flowed with a quiet murmur, its waters glistening under the morning light. But that calm surface belied the storm that brewed on its banks. Across the river, the Persian army waited rows of cavalry, their armor shining, their banners fluttering in the breeze. The satraps of Asia Minor had gathered, confident in their strength. But they had never faced a conqueror like Alexander. Alexander's gaze swept over the river, his mind already racing with the rhythm of battle. His generals counseled caution. The river was wide, its current swift, and the Persians stood ready. But caution was not in Alexander's nature. His voice rang out, clear and fierce. We cross now. And with that, he spurred his horse forward. Plunging into the cold waters, the Macedonian cavalry surged behind him, hooves churning the river, while the phalanx followed, their shields raised against the arrows that rained down from the Persian lines. For a moment, the water seemed a wall of death, but then Alexander's horsemen broke through, crashing into the Persian ranks like a thunderclap. Swords flashed, spears shattered, and the air was filled with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. Alexander fought at the front, his armor gleaming, his gaze fierce. His men saw him, a figure of courage, and their fear melted away. They fought not just as soldiers, but as legends in the making. Soon the Persian line wavered, then broke. Their proud cavalry fled, their satraps cut down or captured. The waters of the Granicus ran red, and on its banks Alexander's banner rose high. The world knew now a storm had risen from the north, and it would not be stopped, the siege of Tyre, defying the impossible, but not all victories came so swiftly. The island city of Tyre, a fortress of towering walls rising from the sea, stood defiant. Its people laughed at the idea of a conqueror taking their city. Their walls were strong, their navy commanded the waves, and they believed themselves invincible, but they had not counted on the will of Alexander. Where others saw an impossible challenge, he saw a test of his resolve. He ordered the construction of a massive causeway, a bridge of earth and stone stretching across the sea to the city's walls. Day by day, his men toiled under the scorching sun, their hands blistered, their bodies weary. From the walls of Tyre, arrows rained down, and the sea seemed to conspire against them, yet Alexander's will was iron. The causeway grew, creeping closer to the city's walls. The Tyrians watched in disbelief as the impossible became reality. For 7 months, the siege dragged on, a struggle of defiance and determination. But at last, the walls of Tyre trembled beneath the Macedonian onslaught. Siege towers loomed, their iron jaws crashing against the ramparts. When the city fell, it fell not just to Alexander's might, but to his relentless spirit. The world saw that no city, no fortress, could stand against him. Where others were content to conquer, Alexander would reshape the world, the oasis of Siwa and the divine Oraclite for all his victories. There were moments when even a conqueror needed to find his place in the universe. In the burning deserts of Egypt, Alexander sought more than gold or glory. He sought the wisdom of the gods. His journey led him to the distant oasis of Siwa, a place of sacred stillness, where the oracle of Zeus Ammon whispered truths lost. To the world as his men camped beneath the scorching sun, Alexander rode alone to the temple, its ancient stones bathed in shadow. The priests greeted him with reverence, and in the silence of the sacred hall, they proclaimed him the son of Zeus Ammon. Alexander's heart stirred. Was he not just a king, but a god's chosen son? A destiny written in the stars? This revelation became a part of him, a light that burned in his soul. He was not just a conqueror. He was a figure of legend, a man whose name would be spoken with awe for generations. His eyes turned east to the great Persian Empire, a prize beyond imagining, the Gaugamela and the fall of Persian. So his march continued, a storm sweeping across the land. In 331 BCE, on the dusty plains of Gaugamela, Alexander faced his greatest challenge. The Persian king Darius III awaited him, his army a vast sea of men and chariots, their ranks stretching to the horizon, but numbers were not enough. Alexander's strategy was flawless. His phalanx held firm, his cavalry struck like lightning, and his own courage blazed at the heart of the battle. He led his men, a shining figure amidst the chaos, and the Persian lines crumbled. Darius fled, his chariot swallowed by the dust, his mighty empire shattered. Babylon, the jewel of the East, opened its gates to Alexander. Persepolis, the palace of kings, stood at his mercy, its golden halls trembling beneath the shadow of the conqueror. And when the flames rose over Persepolis, licking at the sky, it was more than a city burning, it was the end of an age, the empire of Persia, the realm that had once threatened Greece, lay in ruins. And at its heart, Alexander stood, not just a king, but a master of the world. But even in victory, his journey was not over. His eyes turned further east, to the lands beyond the mountains, to the edges of the known world. For Alexander, conquest was not just a means, it was his very being. He marched not just to conquer lands, but to carve his name into the soul of history, from the Hellespont to the sands of Egypt, from the walls of Tyre to the palaces of Persia. Alexander's shadow stretched across the world. But even he did not see the shadow that followed him, the shadow of ambition, of fate, and of a dream that would one day outgrow even the greatest of conquerors. Chapter 10. The March to India, beyond the sun-scorched deserts of Persia, beyond the mighty peaks of the Hindu Kush, lay a land of mist and mystery, India. To the men of Alexander's army, it was a world of fabled riches, strange beasts, and mighty kings. But to Alexander, it was something more. It was the edge of the world, the final chapter in his quest for glory. In the spring of 326 BCE, Alexander led his weary army eastward. They had conquered the greatest empire the world had ever known. Persia had fallen. Its cities bowed, its treasures claimed. Most men would have rested, content with such triumph. But not Alexander. His fire was unquenchable, his ambition a flame that cast no shadow. Beyond the mountains lay a land he had only heard of, a land whose very name whispered of wonder. The march was brutal. The towering peaks of the Hindu Kush clawed at the sky, their passes choked with snow and shadow. Frost clung to the beards of the soldiers, and the thin mountain air burned their lungs. The men struggled against the cliffs, their hands numb, their feet bleeding. Many fell, lost to the cruel grasp of the mountains. But always at the head of the column rode Alexander. His gaze never faltered, his spirit never bent. He was their king, but more than that, he was their fire. As they descended into the lush, steaming plains of India, the air grew thick with heat and scent. Monsoon rains lashed at their faces. Strange birds called from the tangled forests, and the very ground seemed to pulse with life. But for all its beauty, India was not a land to be taken lightly. Here, the conqueror would face his greatest test, the battle of the Hydaspes on the banks of the Hydaspes River. Alexander met his match. Across the river stood King Porus, a giant of a man upon a war elephant, his armor glinting in the pale light. His army stretched in proud ranks, archers, infantry, and war elephants, their tusks capped with iron, their bodies a living wall of muscle and fury. Alexander's men looked on in awe. They had seen many ephos, but never creatures like these, towering above them, their trunks swinging like battering rams. Yet Alexander's gaze was steady. Where others saw a wall, he saw a way under cover of darkness. He led a detachment of his best troops upstream. Crossing the river by night, they swept around the Indian flank. At dawn, the battle began. The Macedonian phalanx advanced, their spears a forest of steel, while Alexander's cavalry struck from the side. The elephants charged, trampling men beneath their massive feet, but the Macedonians did not falter. They lunged at the beasts, striking at their eyes, their tendons, driving them into chaos. Porus fought like a hero of legend, his great form towering atop his elephant. But even he could not turn the tide. Surrounded, his warriors broken, he fought to the last. Finally, wounded and weary, he surrendered. But Alexander did not treat him as a defeated foe. He looked upon Porus and saw a kindred spirit, a king, who fought with honor, "Treat me like a king." Porus is said to have replied when asked how he wished to be treated. And Alexander did just that. He restored Porus's kingdom, making him an ally. In the heat of battle, he had won not just a victory, but a friend, the reluctance of the Macedonians. But while Alexander's fire burned ever brighter, his men's spirits began to fade. For them, the march was no longer a dream of glory, but an endless nightmare. They had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and now marched beneath the rain-soaked jungles of India. They had bled in battles they did not understand, watched their friends die, and felt the sting of homesickness gnawing at their hearts. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, Alexander's ambition met a wall it could not breach. He gathered his generals, his voice filled with fire, his eyes alive with the dream of reaching the great Eastern Ocean. But the men stood silent, their faces weary. When at last they spoke, it was not with the fierce cries of warriors, but with the quiet resolve of those who had endured too much. "No more," they whispered. They had followed him to the ends of the earth. They had conquered kingdoms beyond measure. But now they wished only to see their homes again, to feel the soft soil of Macedonia beneath their feet. Alexander raged, his words sharp as arrows. But even a god-king could not command weary hearts. He turned away, his gaze falling upon the horizon he would never reach. The dream of the Eastern Ocean slipped from his grasp, a shadow fading in the light. Reluctantly, he gave the order. The army would turn back. The march of glory had met its end not with a battle, but with the quiet murmur of men too tired to dream. The journey back, the Gedrosian desert, but the journey home was no triumphal march. Alexander chose a route through the Gedrosian desert, a barren, merciless wasteland of scorching sand and searing wind. It was as if the gods themselves sought to break his spirit. The sun blazed like a cruel eye, the air shimmered with heat, and the very ground seemed to drink the life from his men. Water was scarce. Men drank from stagnant pools, their throats parched, their bodies scorched. Horses fell, their eyes wide with terror, their bones bleaching beneath the sun. The desert showed no mercy, and neither did hunger. Men ate their leather belts, their sandals, anything to stave off the gnawing emptiness, yet Alexander walked among them. He refused to ride while his men marched. He shared their thirst, their suffering. He spoke to them, encouraged them, lifted the fallen. Even as the desert claimed them, his spirit became a beacon of light in the endless night. By the time they emerged from the Gedrosian sands, his once mighty army was a shadow of itself. The men who had marched with him across the world now limped, their eyes hollow, their bodies gaunt. But they followed still, for they had seen in their king a strength beyond mortal flesh, the return to Babylon, glory and tragedy in 324 BCE. Alexander returned to Babylon, a city of towering walls and lush gardens, a jewel of the ancient world. He entered not as a conqueror, but as a legend. His empire stretched from Greece to India, a realm so vast that it seemed to touch the edges of the world, but beneath the golden light of his triumph, shadows gathered. His officers grew restless, their hearts poisoned by ambition and envy. Plots whispered in dark corners, friends turned to rivals, and the unity that had carried them across continents began to fray. Alexander's dream soared ever higher. He spoke of new campaigns, of uniting Greeks and Persians, of a world bound not by war, but by a common vision. He married a Persian princess, urged his generals to do the same, dreaming of a world where East and West would blend as one. But even as his vision grew, his strength withered. Fever gripped him, his body burned, and his voice grew faint. In the great palace of Babylon, surrounded by his generals, he lay upon a golden bed, his eyes fixed upon the stars. When asked who should inherit his empire, his voice was a whisper. To the strongest, and then, with a final breath, Alexander the Great, the man who had carved his name across the world, closed his eyes. The conqueror of kings had fallen. But his legend had only just begun. Chapter 11. The death of Alexander and the division of his empire. The city of Babylon shimmered beneath a silver moon, its great walls rising like mountains against the night. The Euphrates flowed quietly, a silver ribbon threading through the ancient city. But within the palace, a shadow had fallen. In the summer of 323 BCE, Alexander the Great, the young king who had marched his armies to the edge of the known world, lay dying. A tea began with a fever, a slow, insidious heat that clung to his body. His generals gathered around his bed, their faces etched with fear. These were men who had stood beside him in battle, men who had seen him charge headlong into the storm of arrows and blades. But now they watched helplessly as their king's strength faded. His voice, once a thunderous command, became a whisper. His piercing gaze, which had tamed the wild lands of Persia and beyond, grew dim. Rumors whispered through the palace corridors. Was it poison, slipped into his cup at the final banquet? Was it the cost of his relentless ambition, a body worn down by endless campaigns? Or was it simply the fate of all men, even those who dreamed of immortality? No one knew, and perhaps none ever would. As the fever gripped him, Alexander called for his generals. In a voice faint as a breeze, he was asked whom he left his vast empire to. His lips moved, a shadow of a smile, and he breathed to the strongest. With those words, the light in his eyes flickered and went out. Alexander was gone. But in his death, he left behind not just a legacy, but a storm. The wrangling of the Diadochothy world that Alexander had carved out with sword and flame did not fall into peace. Instead, it shattered. His generals, the Diadochia name. That meant successors were not content to share the dream he had built. They were men of ambition, men who had fought at his side, and now saw his death as an opportunity. Ptolemy, a man of vision and cunning, took Egypt, making Alexandria his capital, a city named for the dead conqueror, its towering lighthouse, a beacon of knowledge and power. In Egypt, he founded a dynasty that would endure for centuries. Seleucus claimed the eastern lands, Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. His realm became the Seleucid Empire, a vast but fractured territory where Greek and Persian cultures intertwined. In the streets of Cilicia, scholars debated philosophy beneath the shade of palm trees, while soldiers marched in the shadow of ancient ziggurats. Antigonus, a giant both in stature and in ambition, seized control of Asia Minor, while his descendants, the Antigonids, would struggle for dominance over Greece itself. The mountains and plains of the Hellenic world became a chessboard, with generals and kings playing a deadly game, the dream of a united world of one vast empire stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, crumbled like dust. Instead, a fractured Hellenistic world emerged, each fragment bearing the mark of Alexander, but none living up to his vision. The wars of the successors, but these men, the Diadochi, did not merely claim territories, they fought for them. Alexander's empire became a battlefield, its lands torn by the clash of armies. Alliances were made and broken as easily as promises. Sons betrayed fathers, brothers turned upon one another. The very men who had once sworn loyalty to Alexander now tore at his legacy. Like wolves at a fallen stag, the wars of the successors raged for decades. The Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE saw Antigonus fall, his dream of ruling the whole empire shattered. In Egypt, Ptolemy's descendants forged a new realm of wealth and knowledge, where the Nile's waters nourished the most splendid city in the world, Alexandria. In the east, the Seleucids fought to hold their crumbling territories, a patchwork of cultures and kings. Greece, once the heart of Alexander's conquests, became a land of constant strife. The city-states, once proud and free, now danced to the whims of the Diadochi. Sparta, Athens, Thebes all became pawns in the endless struggle for supremacy, and yet, even in the shadow of endless war, Alexander's dream endured. His name was whispered in the streets of Alexandria, spoken with awe in the marketplaces of Babylon. His legend grew even as his empire broke apart. His memory was a flame that refused to die, the legacy of Alexandria amidst the chaos of war. One city rose as a beacon of light, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander himself on the shores of Egypt, it became a jewel of the Mediterranean, a city where the world's knowledge gathered. Its great library, a vast storehouse of scrolls and wisdom, was a lighthouse for the mind. Philosophers, scientists, and scholars walked its marble halls, seeking the secrets of the stars, the mysteries of the human soul. Ptolemy's dynasty ruled here, not with the iron fist of conquest, but with the pen of culture. Poets composed verses beneath the shade of palm trees, mathematicians calculated the curves of the earth, and physicians explored the secrets of the human body. Greek and Egyptian gods shared temples, their stories blending in a dance of myth and faith. But Alexandria was more than a city of learning. It was a bridge, a place where East and West met, where the wisdom of Persia mingled with the reason of Greece. It was the living embodiment of Alexander's dream of unity, a place where cultures did not clash, but enriched one another. As the Diadochi fought for scraps of the empire, Alexandria thrived. Its lighthouse, the pharaohs, cast a light that could be seen for miles, a symbol of the knowledge and hope that Alexander had kindled. His dream of a world united by culture and learning lived on in this city of marble and light. A world changed forever. Alexander was gone, his body entombed in a golden sarcophagus in Alexandria, his once mighty empire divided among the squabbling Diadochi. But his influence endured. Greek cities dotted the shores of the Mediterranean, from Egypt to Bactria. Greek became the language of kings, the tongue of trade and philosophy. Sculptors carved gods and heroes in the Hellenic style, and philosophers debated beneath the porticos of temples. The Hellenistic world that rose from Alexander's shattered empire was a world of fusion. Greek and Eastern traditions intertwined. Persian kings wore Greek diadems, and Greek philosophers studied the stars of Babylon. Merchants traveled the Silk Road, carrying goods and ideas from the Aegean to the Ganges. In the bustling streets of Alexandria, in the temples of Babylon, in the mountain fortresses of Bactria, the name of Alexander was remembered. His vision of a united world had died with him, but the seeds of his dream had taken root. They grew in the minds of scholars, in the hearts of kings, in the tales whispered by merchants on distant roads, for Alexander had not merely conquered lands, he had reshaped civilization. The world was never the same, and though his empire had fallen, his legend lived on. Beneath the stars of the ancient world, beneath the whisper of the desert winds, his name echoed still. Chapter 12. The Rise of the Hellenistic Kingdoms. When Alexander's mighty empire shattered, the world did not fall into darkness. Instead, it transformed, giving rise to a new era, the Hellenistic Age. In the wake of his conquests, the lands he had once ruled became a mosaic of powerful kingdoms, each ruled by one of his former generals. They were the Diadochi, men who had fought beside Alexander, now turned rivals. And though they had once shared a dream of a united empire, their ambitions tore the dream apart. Yet this age was not merely one of war and division. It was a time of blending of East meeting West, of Greek culture merging with the traditions of Egypt, Persia, and India. Greek became the lingua franca of the known world, spoken in bustling markets from Alexandria to Babylon. In this world, cities were not just centers of power. They were beacons of learning and art. Alexandria, a city founded by Alexander himself, rose as a glittering jewel on the Egyptian coast. Its towering lighthouse, the pharaohs, cast a guiding light over the sea, while its great library became a treasure trove of knowledge. Scholars, philosophers, and poets gathered there, their voices mingling like the currents of the Nile, but Alexandria was not alone. Cities like Antioch and Pergamon flourished, their streets lined with marble statues, their theaters filled with the songs of poets. In these bustling metropolises, Greek thought merged with local beliefs, creating a new, vibrant culture, a culture that was Greek, yet also something more, the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egyptian, the fertile lands of Egypt. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, carved out a kingdom of his own. He was no mere conqueror, he was a builder, a ruler who transformed Alexandria into a beacon of Hellenistic culture. The city's great library became a sanctuary of wisdom, its shelves filled with scrolls on philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Here, scholars from across the world gathered, exchanging ideas in the cool shade of marble columns, but beneath the grandeur of Alexandria, tensions simmered. Ptolemy and his descendants ruled as Greek pharaohs, wearing the double crown of Egypt. Yet they were foreigners on the Nile. The Greek elite lived in luxury, their villas overlooking the harbor, while native Egyptians toiled in the fields. Their ancient temples standing in the shadow of Greek columns, the Ptolemaic rulers worshipped both the Greek gods and the Egyptian deities, adopting the image of the divine pharaoh. Cleopatra, the last of their line, would one day become a legend. A queen who spoke many tongues, a ruler who danced between two worlds. But for now, the Ptolemaic dynasty basked in its wealth and power, its ships sailing the Mediterranean, its scholars peering into the mysteries of the stars. Egypt under the Ptolemies was a land of contrast, a place where the wisdom of the East met the reason of the Greeks, where towering temples rose beside bustling markets. It was a kingdom of gold and grain, of pharaohs who spoke Greek, of scholars who wrote in hieroglyphs, the Seleucid Empire, Persia's Hellenistic Hirto, the East, Another of Alexander's generals forged his own realm, Seleucus, a man of ambition and vision. His empire, the Seleucid Empire, stretched from the Aegean to the borders of India, a vast, sprawling land where Greek culture mingled with the ancient traditions of Persia and Mesopotamia. It was an empire of glittering cities and wild frontiers, of bustling marketplaces and ancient temples. Seleucus made his capital at Antioch, a city where the streets were filled with the scent of spices, where merchants traded silk from the east and gold from the west. Greek became the language of the court, yet the ancient gods of Persia were still worshipped beneath the stars. In the city of Cilicia on the Tigris, Greek statues stood beside the towering ziggurats of Babylon, but the Seleucid Empire was not merely a land of harmony. It was a realm of constant struggle. The vast distances, the diverse cultures, the sheer scale of the empire all made it difficult to govern. Rebellions flared in the east as local rulers sought to break free. The Bactrians, the Parthians, the Persians all were restless, watching the Greek rulers with suspicion. Yet for all its chaos, the Seleucid Empire was a bridge of place, where the wisdom of Persia met the reason of Greece, where merchants traveled the Silk Road, carrying not just goods, but ideas. It was a land of ancient temples and marble statues, of Persian kings who wore Greek diadems, the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon back in the rugged hills of Macedon, the birthplace of Alexander. The Antigonid dynasty rose to power, the land of warriors and kings, where the wind whispered through the mountain passes, became a kingdom ruled by the descendants of Antigonus, one of Alexander's greatest generals. But this was not the Macedon of Alexander's youth. The great king's empire was gone, and in its place stood a patchwork of kingdoms, each ruled by his former generals. The Antigonid kings ruled with iron, their armies marching across the hills of Greece, their banners flying over the ancient city of Pella, yet Greece was not easily ruled. The proud city-states, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, they remembered their freedom, their days of glory. The Antigonid kings were forced to walk a delicate line, using diplomacy, alliances, and at times, brutal force. Battles were fought, treaties were signed, and the shadow of Alexander loomed over every decision. But even in this land of strife, culture flourished. Philosophers wandered the olive groves, debating the nature of virtue. Sculptors carved marble. Statues, their chiseled forms capturing the beauty of gods and heroes. Poets sang of battles and love, their voices echoing through the marble theaters. Macedon under the Antigonids was a land of warriors and poets, a place with a spirit of. Ancient Greece lived on, even as the world around it changed. The cultural blossoming of Hellenism at this age was more than politics and war. It was a time of cultural flourishing, an era when the wisdom of the Greeks mingled with the ancient traditions of the East. In the bustling streets of Alexandria, mathematicians like Euclid laid the foundations of geometry, their theorems inscribed on scrolls that would outlive empires. Astronomers gazed at the stars, mapping the heavens, while physicians explored the secrets of the human body. In Athens, philosophers debated beneath the shade of olive trees. Zeno taught of Stoicism, a philosophy of inner peace and virtue. Epicurus spoke of happiness as the greatest good. The city's streets were filled with the laughter of children, the songs of poets, the murmur of scholars across the Hellenistic world. Art and science blossomed. Sculptors carved marble statues of gods and heroes, their forms graceful and lifelike. Poets composed verses that celebrated love and loss. Theaters filled with crowds, their laughter and tears mingling with the actors' lines. The Hellenistic age was a world of light and shadow, a world where kings fought for power, but poets dreamed of beauty, where soldiers marched to battle, but scholars pondered the mysteries of the stars. It was a world forever changed by Alexander's conquests, a world where East and West met, not in battle, but in a dance of culture and knowledge, and in the libraries of Alexandria, in the bustling markets of Antioch, in the marble halls of Athens. The dream of a united world lived on not in armies and empires, but in the hearts and minds of those who walked the streets. Chapter 13. The Greek city-states in the Hellenistic world. In the heart of the Hellenistic world, where kingdoms stretched across vast lands, and mighty kings ruled from glittering palaces, Athens seemed small, a faded jewel in a world of crowns. Yet, while its political power dwindled, its light did not die. It became something else, a beacon of thought, a sanctuary of the mind. The city's once mighty walls were little more than silent witnesses to a golden past. The Agora, where once orators like Pericles had stirred the hearts of citizens, was now a marketplace of ideas. The Lyceum, where Aristotle had once wandered with his students, remained a place of learning. And the Academy of Plato continued to welcome those who sought wisdom in a world of turmoil. Philosophers still walked the shaded colonnades, their robes flowing like the gentle breeze. They argued not over the fate of empires, but over the nature of virtue, the essence of happiness, and the soul's place in the cosmos. Zeno taught in the Stoa, his voice calm, his words offering the solace of stoicism, a belief in inner peace, in courage, and in accepting fate. Others followed Epicurus, who spoke of pleasure not as indulgence, but as the absence of pain, as the quiet joy of a simple life. Yet Athens was a city of contradictions. Its streets, once filled with the laughter of children and the cheers of victory, now echoed with the murmur of scholars. Its democracy had withered, its assembly a shadow of its former self. The great houses stood silent, their courtyards empty, their wealth diminished. Athens was no longer a city of power, it was a city of memories, of marble statues and whispered debates. It lived not in strength, but in spirit. Sparta, clinging to ancient traditions to the south, beyond the rugged hills and fertile plains, stood Sparta, a city of warriors, a name that had once struck fear across Greece. But the Sparta of the Hellenistic age was a shadow of the iron city it had once been. Its soldiers, once the finest in the world, now seemed like relics of a vanished era. Their shields still gleamed, their spears still pointed skyward, but their numbers dwindled, their strength fading like mist beneath the sun. Sparta had clung to its ancient ways, its boys still taken from their mothers to be trained as warriors, its men living in barracks, bound by a harsh code of discipline. The laws of Lycurgus were sacred, unchanging, a rigid armor that protected them, but also imprisoned them. In a world where kingdoms rose and fell, where Greek culture spread across Asia and Egypt, Sparta remained a stubborn fortress, unchanged, unyielding, but the world around Sparta had changed. No longer did its warriors march to conquer. No longer did its kings lead armies to glory. The Spartans now looked out upon a world. They did not understand a world of philosophers and kings, of scholars and merchants. Their simple, austere lives seemed an echo of a time that was gone. Yet for all its decline, Sparta remained proud. Its warriors still spoke of Thermopylae, of Leonidas, and the 300. Its elders still gathered in the shadow of Mount Taygetus, their eyes hardened by the years. They were no longer masters of Greece, but in their hearts they were still Spartans, men of iron will, whose spirits could not be conquered, the Achaean League, a flicker of unity, but even as Sparta clung to its past, a new hope of unity flickered in the Peloponnesus, the Achaean League. In a world where the Hellenistic kings carved empires from the ruins of Alexander's dream, the city-states of Achaea sought strength and unity. It was a confederation, a fragile brotherhood of cities, bound not by force, but by choice. The Achaean League was a promise of protection, of mutual aid, of shared laws and common defense. Each city sent representatives to the assembly, where decisions were made by vote. It was a faint echo of the ancient Greek spirit of freedom, a reminder that the city-states were not yet ready to surrender their souls under leaders like Aratus of Sicyon. The League grew in strength. It resisted the might of the Hellenistic monarchs, forging alliances, defending its lands. But it was a delicate balance. The League was a dream of unity, but it was also a dance of politics. Cities quarreled, alliances shifted, and the shadow of the great powers loomed ever closer, yet for a time, the Achaean League shone like a beacon. Its armies marched beneath a common banner. Its people spoke of freedom, of the ancient rights of the Greek cities. It was a fragile light in a world of mighty kingdoms, but it was a light that refused to die, the role of philosophy. From Stoicism to Epicureanism, the Greek city-states could no longer rule the world. They could still shape it. For their greatest gift was not their armies, but their ideas. In the quiet courtyards of Athens, in the shaded colonnades of the Stoa, in the gardens of Epicurus, new philosophies bloomed, their roots sinking deep into the hearts of men. Stoicism, taught by Zeno beneath the painted porch of the Stoa, offered a path of peace in a world of chaos. It taught that virtue was the only true good, that suffering was inevitable, but could be endured with courage and wisdom. Its followers were not kings or generals, but humble men who found strength and acceptance. In contrast, the Epicureans sought happiness not in power or fame, but in simple pleasures: a quiet meal, a friendly conversation, the cool shade of an olive tree. Epicurus taught that the gods were distant, that the soul was mortal, and that peace was found in the freedom from fear. His garden was a refuge, a place where men and women could ponder the meaning of life. These philosophies spread across the Hellenistic world, carried by merchants, soldiers, and scholars. They were not just teachings, they were a solace, a way to find peace in a world of uncertainty. For the Greek city-states had lost their power, but their wisdom lived on. The theaters and the agora, echoes of a glorious past. Even in decline, the Greek city-states remained vibrant. Their theaters echoed with laughter and tears. Their marketplaces buzzed with the voices of merchants. In the great theater of Athens, the comedies of Menander drew crowds, their gentle humor a mirror of everyday life. In the agora, the scent of spices mingled with the songs of poets, and the sun cast long shadows over the marble statues. Festivals continued, their processions winding through the streets, their dancers moving to the rhythm of ancient songs. The great games, the Olympics, the Pythian Games, the Isthmian Games still crowned champions, their victors celebrated as heroes, for though their walls had crumbled, though their armies marched no more, the Greek city-states lived on in their culture. They were a world of marble and sunlight, of poetry and philosophy, of laughter and debate. Their power had waned, but their spirit was undimmed, and so the Greek city-states Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth stood like ancient trees, their roots deep in the soil of history. Their leaves whispered with the stories of heroes and gods. Their branches reached for the sky. They were not what they once had been, but they were not forgotten. They were the soul of Greece, a soul that lived on, even in a world forever changed. Chapter 14, The Shadow of Rome in the West, where the Tiber's waters wound through the 7 hills, a new power stirred. Rome, a city born of iron and ambition, a republic forged by warriors and statesmen. For centuries it had battled. Its neighbors conquered Italy and grown strong. But Rome's hunger was not easily sated, and soon its gaze turned east to the world of marble temples, wise philosophers, and proud city-states. To Greece.at first, the Romans were fascinated by Greek culture. They spoke of Greece as the land of heroes, of gods who walked among men, of poets whose verses were like music. Roman generals collected Greek statues. Roman senators read Greek philosophy. The young noblemen of Rome learned to speak Greek, to admire its art, to debate in its style. Greece was a treasure trove of wisdom and beauty, a mirror in which Rome saw its own reflection, refined and radiant, but admiration soon became ambition. The Romans, with their iron legions and their unyielding discipline, saw not just beauty in Greece, but opportunity. For Greece was a land divided, its proud cities locked in their ancient rivalries. Macedon, once the empire of Alexander, had become a kingdom struggling for survival. The cities of southern Greece were a patchwork of alliances, always quarreling, always grasping for power. Rome saw a world. It could master a world where Greek beauty could serve Roman strength, and so the legions marched east, their shields shining in the sun, their standards fluttering in the wind. Rome came not as a guest, but as a conqueror. And though the Greeks saw in the Romans the faces of students, they would soon learn they were facing masters, the Macedonian Wars. Rome's march into Greece's first step in Rome's conquest of Greece was not a thunderous invasion, but a series of calculated moves. The Macedonian Wars were a slow tightening of Rome's grip on the Hellenistic world. Macedon, the ancient kingdom of Philip and Alexander, stood as the first target dot in 214 BCE. The First Macedonian War erupted, a conflict born not of Roman greed, but of fear. Macedon's king, Philip V, allied with Rome's great rival, Carthage. The Romans, locked in a brutal struggle with Hannibal, could not afford another enemy. And so they fought not to conquer, but to contain. But when Carthage fell, Rome's eyes turned fully eastward. The Second Macedonian War saw the Romans clash with Philip once more. On the fields of Cynoscephaly, the Roman legions met the Macedonian phalanx, the mighty formation that had once conquered Persia. But time had changed the world, and the Roman legions, with their flexibility, their discipline, shattered the phalanx like glass. Macedon was humbled, yet Rome was not content. The Third Macedonian War brought the final blow. Perseus, the last king of Macedon, rose against Rome. But at Pydna in 168 BCE, his armies were crushed. Rome's soldiers marched through the fields of Greece, their spears glinting in the sunlight, their banners casting long shadows. Macedon was no longer a kingdom, it was a Roman province. The Greek world had not fallen with a single blow. It had been unmade piece by piece, like a beautiful statue shattered by an iron hammer, the sack of Corinth, but even after Macedon's fall, Greece's spirit remained unbroken. In the south, the city-states still whispered of freedom, still dreamed of their ancient glory. And in 146 BCE, the embers of that dream flared into flame. The Achaean League, a confederation of Greek cities, dared to defy Rome. It was a gesture of pride, of stubborn hope. But Rome's response was swift and brutal. The Roman general Lucius Mummius led his legions into the heart of Greece, and at Corinth, the final blow fell. Corinth, the shining jewel of the Greek world, a city of wealth and beauty, was sacked. The Roman soldiers shattered statues, plundered temples, and burned the city to the ground. The streets ran with blood, and the air filled with smoke. The treasures of Greece, its art, its knowledge, its history were carried away to Rome. Trophies of conquest, Greece, the land of philosophers and poets, had become a province. Its proud cities bowed to the will of the Senate. Its ancient freedoms were memories, its glory a shadow. Yet even in defeat, Greece was not truly vanquished, for the Romans had conquered Greece. But in time, Greece would conquer Rome. Hellenistic influence on Rome. Romans marched as conquerors, but they returned as students. Greece was now a province of Rome, but in the halls of Roman villas, in the gardens of the wealthy, Greek statues stood beneath marble colonnades. Greek philosophers lectured Roman nobles. Greek myths were told to Roman children. Roman generals brought back not just gold and silver from Greece, but books, sculptures, and teachers. The Stoic philosophy of Zeno became the guide of Roman statesmen. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, spoke of virtue and reason, his words echoing the wisdom of the Greek philosophers. The Roman gods themselves were dressed in Greek robes. Jupiter was Zeus, Mars was Ars, Venus was Aphrodite. Rome had taken Greece by force, but it was Greece that transformed Rome's soul. The conquerors became the disciples. The Senate might rule the world, but it ruled in the shadow of Greek thought. The Roman poet Horace would write, "Captive Greece captured her fierce conqueror." Yet even as Greek culture flourished in Rome, the cities of Greece languished under the weight of Roman rule. Athens remained a center of learning, its philosophers teaching in the shaded groves. Delphi still drew pilgrims, its oracle whispering of fate. Olympia still crowned champions. But the spirit of freedom of the great city-states was gone. Greece was now a province of an empire, but an empire. Forever touched by the light of Greece, the survival of Greek culture even in chains, Greece was not silent. Its art continued to inspire. Its philosophy continued to teach. The Hellenistic kingdoms may have fallen, but their spirit lived on in the language, in the thoughts, in the hearts of those who read Greek, who spoke Greek, who dreamed in Greek. Athens remained a city of scholars, its streets walked by philosophers who debated beneath the colonnades. Alexandria in Egypt became a beacon of learning, its great library a treasure house of wisdom. The Greek language spread across the Mediterranean, spoken by merchants, soldiers, and scholars. Rome might rule the world, but the world thought in Greek. The statues of Zeus and Athena still stood, their faces calm and eternal. The poems of Homer were recited in the grand halls of Roman villas. The plays of Sophocles were performed on Roman stages. And even as Roman emperors wore the laurels of victory, they spoke of honor, of courage, of wisdom virtues learned from Greece. The shadow of Rome might have fallen across Greece, but in that shadow, the light of Greek culture never dimmed. It became a whisper, a memory, a dream, but a dream that lived on. For though Rome was mighty, Greece was immortal. Chapter 15. The eternal legacy of Greece in the shaded groves of Athens, where sunlight danced through olive leaves and the murmurs of students filled the air. A quiet revolution was born. This was the world of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The world of questions. Questions that reached beyond the stars, that asked not only what was, but what could be. Questions that shaped the soul of humanity. Socrates wandered the streets, his simple robes fluttering in the breeze, his bare feet brushing the dust of the agora. He was a gadfly, a voice that whispered of virtue, of justice, of the examined. Life. Know thyself, he urged, his questions a mirror in which his listeners saw their own ignorance. To some, he was a menace, to others a prophet, but his voice did not die with him. His student, Plato, preserved his teachings, writing dialogues where ideas danced like shadows on a cave wall. In his academy, Plato spoke of ideal forms, of a world beyond the senses, of a truth that could be glimpsed but never grasped. And then came Aristotle, the student who would walk his own path. Aristotle, who saw the world not as an illusion, but as a tapestry of causes and effects. His writings became a library of knowledge of logic, ethics, politics, and science. From these three minds flowed a river of thought that would nourish the world. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, Christian theologians read Plato and Aristotle, shaping their faith with reason. In the Renaissance, scholars in Florence and Rome rediscovered their works, their pens dancing across parchment in a frenzy of rediscovery. Even in the Age of Enlightenment, when reason was the new god, Greek philosophy stood as a temple, a reminder that wisdom begins with wonder, and so the voices of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle never truly faded. They were echoes, whispers carried by the wind, questions that would never be silenced. Greek art and architecture, an undying beauty high above the city of Athens. The Parthenon stood like a crown of marble, its columns soaring toward the sky. It was a temple to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, but it was more than a shrine. It was a vision of perfection. Proportion, balance, harmony the Greeks did not merely build. They created beauty across the Greek world. Sculptors like Phidias brought stone to life. Marble figures rose with serene faces, their flowing robes frozen in time, their gazes calm and eternal. Gods and heroes, mortals and monsters, each figure was a whisper of eternity, a reminder of a world where beauty was a reflection of the divine. But Greek art was not just a feast for the eyes, it was a language. In the delicate folds of a statue's garment, in the proud posture of a bronze warrior, the Greeks spoke of courage, of grace, of the human spirit. Their temples were not just places of worship, but monuments to the power of the human mind. In the Renaissance, the world would look back to Greece, and the forms of Phidias would dance again. Michelangelo's David would rise like a Greek hero, his gaze fierce and proud. The columns of the Parthenon would echo in the colonnades of St. Peter's in the capital of Washington, D.C. Greek art was not a relic, it was a seed, and its beauty bloomed across the ages. Even now, When the ruins of Greece stand beneath the stars, when the statues are worn and the temples are shattered, their beauty is not gone. It is a ghost, a whisper, a promise that beauty is eternal, democracy. A Greek invention that changed the world. In the sunlit slopes of the Pnyx, the citizens of Athens gathered. They were not kings or priests, not lords or conquerors. They were farmers, artisans, merchants. Yet here, in this sacred place, they were equals. Each man had a voice, each man a vote. This was the birth of democracy. It was an experiment, a fragile thing, as delicate as the olive leaves that shaded the city. But it was also a flame, a light that shone in the darkness of tyranny. In the assembly, the Athenians debated the fate of their city, their voices rising like a chorus. They argued of laws, of war and peace, of justice and duty. And in their debates, they found not just a way to govern, they found a way to be free. But democracy in Athens was not perfect. Women were silent, slaves were voiceless. The city that celebrated freedom could be ruthless to those it feared. Socrates, who had once taught a virtue, was sentenced to die by the vote of his fellow citizens. Democracy could be noble, but it could also be cruel, yet even in its flaws, it was a beginning. When the city-states of Greece fell beneath the shadow of Macedon, when Rome's iron legions marched across the Hellenic world, the idea of democracy did not die. It slept, a seed buried beneath the ashes of empire, and in the age of revolution, that seed bloomed. In the fields of Lexington, in the streets of Paris, the voice of Athens was heard again. We the people, they declared, all men are created equal. The dream of democracy, born beneath the Athenian sky, became the hope of nations, a timeless mythos. The Greek stories that never fed long before the temples rose, long before the philosophers spoke, they were stories. Around the flickering fires, in the shadow of olive trees, the Greeks whispered of gods and heroes, of monsters and miracles. And those stories, those myths became the soul of Greece. They spoke of Zeus, the thunderous king of the gods, whose anger could shake the heavens. Of Hera, his proud queen, fierce and jealous. Of Apollo, whose golden chariot carried the sun across the sky, and Artemis, who danced in the moonlight with her silver bow. They were not distant deities, they were characters, with loves and hates, with jealousies and joys, and then there were the heroes. Achilles, the fierce warrior whose rage could ignite the sky. Odysseus, the cunning king whose wits could bend fate. Heracles, the giant slayer, whose strength was a blessing and a curse. Their deeds were songs, their names whispered in every village, their stories etched in the minds of the young. But Greek mythology was not just a collection of tales, it was a mirror. It spoke of pride and punishment, of love and loss, of courage and cowardice. In the flight of Icarus, it warned of hubris. In the suffering of Prometheus, it celebrated defiance. In the trials of Odysseus, it told of the longing for home, and the myths did not die. In Rome, they were reborn. Their names changed, but their stories the same. In the Middle Ages, they became tales of knights and dragons. In the Renaissance, they danced across the canvases of the great masters. Even today, in books, in films, in the whispered stories of childhood, the Greek myths live. They are not just stories of a distant past, they are stories of the human heart. And as long as humanity dreams, as long as it fears and hopes and loves, The myths of Greece will never fade. Chapter 16. The Byzantine Renaissance, the New Greece, in the twilight of the Western Roman Empire, as the city of Rome crumbled beneath the weight of barbarian invasions, another light began to shine in the east. Byzantium, an ancient Greek city nestled on the shores of the Bosporus, rose to prominence. Once a modest trading post, it transformed into the heart of an empire. Constantinople, the new Rome, Constantine the Great, in the year 330 CE, chose this city as his capital. It was a choice of vision, for here was a city that bridged two worlds: Europe and Asia, the West and the East. High walls rose around it, their stone blocks gazing out over the glittering waters of the Golden Horn. The city's streets echoed with the Greek language, its churches filled with the chants of Byzantine hymns. In its libraries, the works of Plato, Aristotle, and Homer were preserved, even as Western Europe fell into shadow. This was not just the survival of Greece, it was its rebirth. While the Latin-speaking West withered, Constantinople flourished. Its merchants sailed the Mediterranean, its scholars debated philosophy, and its emperors draped themselves in the imperial purple. Though they called themselves Romans, their world was profoundly Greek. The city's soul was shaped by the Hellenic tradition. Greek became the language of the court, the church, and the marketplace. In its schools, young minds were taught the works of ancient philosophers, while its churches resounded with hymns written in the tongue of Homer. Constantinople was a fortress, a marketplace, and a temple, but above all, it was a beacon of Greek civilization, burning brightly in a darkening world. Constantinople, the queen of Citius Beneath, the golden light of dawn, Constantinople shimmered like a jewel upon the waters. Its walls, mighty and unbroken, stretched across the land, their shadow a promise of protection. Within those walls, a city of wonders came to life. Towers rose against the sky, their domes glittering beneath the sunlight, and minarets sang out. The hymns of a Christian empire, the heart of the city, was the Hagia Sophia, a marvel of architecture whose vast dome seemed to float upon light itself. Within its sacred halls, candles flickered, their golden glow dancing across mosaics of saints and angels. Beneath the dome, priests chanted, their voices rising like incense to the heavens. This was not just a church, it was a gateway too. The divine dot in the hippodrome, the roar of the crowd filled the air. Chariots thundered around the track, their wheels a blur, their drivers leaning into the wind. The colors of the rival factions, the blues and the greens, flashed beneath. The sunlight and fortunes were won and lost in the frenzy of the races. It was a place of passion, of triumph and defeat, a theater of life itself. Beyond the grandeur, the streets of Constantinople pulsed with life. Merchants crowded the marketplaces, their stalls filled with silks from Persia, spices from India, and gold from Africa. Sailors sang as they unloaded their ships along the bustling harbors, while scholars wandered the great libraries, their fingers tracing the words of ancient manuscripts. This was the crossroads of the world, where East met West, and where the spirit of Greece lived on, the age of Justinian, a dream of Emperor in the 6th century. A dreamer rose to the throne of Constantinople. His name was Justinian, a man of humble origins who had become a legend. His vision was nothing less than the restoration of Rome, the reconquest of the lost western provinces, the rebirth of an empire that had once ruled the world under The command of his brilliant general Belisarius, Justinian's armies swept across North Africa, reclaiming the old Roman lands. They marched into Italy, capturing the eternal city of Rome itself. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed that the dream had been fulfilled. The Mediterranean became a Roman lake once more, yet conquest was a fleeting glory. The wars drained the empire's wealth while plagues swept through the streets of Constantinople, a silent killer that claimed rich and poor alike. Even as his armies fought in distant lands, the emperor faced chaos at home. The Nika riots, a furious uprising that nearly burned the city to the ground, threatened to sweep away his rule. But in the shadow of flames, his wife, Theodora, stood beside him, her courage unyielding. But Justinian's true legacy was not in his conquests, it was in his laws. The Corpus Juris Civilis, the Justinian Code, became the foundation of European legal thought for centuries. In its pages, the wisdom of Rome was preserved, and the idea of justice became a treasure passed down to future generations, a Greek golden age in the Byzantine Empire. Though swords flashed and armies marched, the true brilliance of Byzantium lay not in its conquests, but in its culture. Within the shaded halls of Constantinople, scholars labored over ancient texts, copying the works of Homer, Sophocles, and Aristotle. The wisdom of the Greeks was preserved. Even as the Western world forgot it, artisans adorned the walls of churches with dazzling mosaics, their golden tiles shimmering in the candlelight. Faces of saints, serene and solemn, gazed down from the ceilings, their eyes filled with a quiet, otherworldly wisdom. This was a new art, Christian in faith, but Greek in soul. Theologians debated the mysteries of faith, their voices rising in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia. In the great councils, bishops argued over the nature of Christ, their words a blend of philosophy and devotion. Yet beneath their robes, they were still Greeks, their thoughts shaped by Plato, their logic a gift of Aristotle. In this world, the spirit of Greece was not a memory, it was a living flame. The language of Homer remained the language of learning. The teachings of Plato and Aristotle guided the thoughts of philosophers and priests alike. The poets of the Byzantine court composed verses that echoed the beauty of Sappho and Pindar. The empire called itself Roman, but it was a Greek world reborn. A world where faith and reason walked hand in hand, where the brilliance of ancient Hellas shone through the shadows of the Christian cross. Chapter 17. The Twilight of Byzantium. For nearly 1,000 years, Constantinople stood as an eternal city, a glittering jewel set between Europe and Asia, a beacon of faith and knowledge. Its walls, mighty and unbroken, rose like a guardian, protecting a world where Greek and Roman traditions merged with Christian faith. Within its marble halls, emperors draped in purple held court, their commands echoing from the Aegean to the Black Sea. But the world around this bastion of civilization was changing. New powers stirred beyond its borders. From the south, Arab armies swept across the deserts, carrying the banner of Islam. From the north, the Bulgarians and the Slavs pressed against Byzantine lands. Yet even these threats paled before the thunderous approach of the Seljuk Turks, whose horsemen swept across Anatolia, claiming the empire's heartlands. Still, Constantinople endured. Its towering walls withstood siege after siege, its golden domes glimmering beneath the sun. The Hagia Sophia's vast dome remained a symbol of divine protection, and its marketplaces buzzed with merchants from distant lands. But this was a City under siege not only by armies, but by time itself. Its provinces slipped away, one by one. The great empire of Byzantium was shrinking, its strength fading, and though it clung to its ancient glory, a shadow loomed ever closer the world. That had once looked to Constantinople as a beacon now saw it as a relic, a proud fortress, but an isolated one. Enemies gathered at its gates, not just from the east, but from the west, where a new betrayal awaited, the Fourth Crusade, a Christian betrayal in the spring of 1204. A betrayal unlike any other shattered the walls of Constantinople. The armies of the Fourth Crusade, knights bearing the cross of Christ, were meant to sail for the Holy Land. But greed and ambition, fanned by the merchants of Venice, led them astray. Instead of marching against the Muslim world, they turned their swords against their fellow Christians. On the morning of April 12th, the Latin knights surged through the city's gates. They looted the great churches, their horses trampling the sacred mosaics of the Hagia Sophia. Relics, icons, and golden treasures were torn from their resting places. Statues of ancient heroes were melted down for their precious metal. There, beauty lost forever. In the streets, the cries of the people rose like smoke. Mingling with the laughter of the conquerors, empresses were dragged from their palaces, their jewels torn away. Libraries filled with ancient texts were burned. There, wisdom turned to ash. The Latin knights who had once knelt in prayer now reveled in the spoils of a Christian city. And when the flames finally died, Constantinople was a shadow of itself, its sacred sites desecrated, its treasures scattered across Europe. For the next 57 years, the city would endure the humiliation of Latin rule, a pale imitation of the great empire it had once been. The emperors of Byzantium, once the rulers of a vast dominion, now wandered in exile, their throne usurped, their empire shattered. The scars of this betrayal would never fully heal, the Paleologan restoration and a fragile revival, but Byzantium was not dead. In 1261, a spark of hope flickered. The exiled Greek lords, led by the Palaiologos dynasty, reclaimed Constantinople. Michael VIII Palaiologos marched into the ruined city, his banners fluttering beneath the golden light of dawn. Priests chanted in the Hagia Sophia once more, their voices rising beneath the dome that had survived so many storms. A fragile revival began. The city's walls were repaired, its churches restored. Scholars gathered in the palace halls there, voices debating philosophy and theology. Artisans adorned the churches with new mosaics, their golden tiles shimmering in the candlelight. The markets reopened, and the city's streets filled with the hum of life, but beneath the surface, the empire was a shadow of its former self. Its lands were reduced to a narrow strip of territory along the Aegean coast and the Peloponnese. The Black Sea, once a Byzantine lake, was now a playground for Geno's merchants. The emperor's authority barely reached beyond the walls of Constantinople, and the rising power of the Ottoman Turks loomed ever closer. Still, the city endured. Its scholars continued to study the works of Plato and Aristotle, preserving the wisdom of ancient Greece. Its churches stood as sanctuaries of faith, and its people clung to their ancient traditions. But the world around them was changing, and the shadow of conquest drew near. The siege of Constantinople, the last stand in the spring of 1453, a young and determined conqueror appeared at the gates of Constantinople. His name was Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottoman Turks. To his soldiers, he was the conqueror, a warrior with a vision of empire. To the defenders of Constantinople, he was the storm that had finally come. For 53 days the siege raged. Ottoman cannons roared, their iron balls crashing against the ancient walls. Towers of flame rose where the Turkish ships burned the city's harbor defenses. Within the city, the people prayed in the Hagia Sophia, their candles flickering beneath. The gaze of Christ's serene mosaic, the emperor, Constantine Palaeologos, stood with his soldiers at the walls. In his armor, he was not just an emperor, he was a symbol of a dying world. His voice carried above the clash of swords, urging his men to stand firm. But the walls, so mighty for centuries, were crumbling beneath the onslaught on the dawn of May 29th. The final assault began. Ottoman soldiers poured through the breaches, their banners rising above the walls. Constantine was last seen charging into the fray, his sword flashing beneath the rising sun. By nightfall, the city was lost. The great doors of the Hagia Sophia were thrown open, and Mehmed entered, his voice echoing beneath the dome. Constantinople, the city of emperors, was his, but though the city had fallen, the light of Byzantium did not die, the legacy of Byzantium thought. The last emperor fell upon the walls, though the golden mosaics of the Hagia Sophia now echoed with the prayers of another faith. The spirit of Byzantium lived on. Greek scholars, fleeing the fallen city, carried their ancient texts to Italy. There, in the city-states of Florence and Venice, their wisdom ignited a new age, the Renaissance. Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and Sophocles became the teachers of a new world. Greek Orthodox Christianity survived, its faith carried to the mountains of Russia, to the churches of the Balkans, and to the monasteries of Mount Athos. The Hellenic spirit endured in liturgy, in icons, in whispered prayers beneath ancient domes. The ideas of Greece, preserved by Byzantium, would shape the world. The light of learning, the love of wisdom, the search for truth, these were not lost. In the Renaissance, in the Enlightenment. In the modern world, the legacy of Byzantium would be felt. The great walls of Constantinople had fallen, but the ideas born within them would never die. Chapter 18. Greece under Ottoman rule, as the great city of Constantinople fell to the thundering cannons of Sultan Mehmed II in 1453, a darkness swept across the Hellenic world. For nearly 4 centuries, Greece became a land of shadows, its mountains and islands swallowed by the vast Ottoman Empire. The proud cities of Athens, Sparta, and Thessaloniki were now mere provinces in a foreign dominion. The shimmering blue of the Aegean whispered not of freedom, but of a world in chains. The Greeks were now Demas second-class citizens in their own land. Their faith was tolerated but restricted, their churches small and humble, their priests robed in sorrow. Heavy taxes pressed upon them, a burden that bent the backs of farmers and craftsmen alike. They watched as their grand temples crumbled, as the ancient theaters fell silent, their marble ruins swallowed by time. But though the world around them had changed, the soul of Greece endured. In quiet villages nestled among the olive groves, old men whispered stories of the heroes of old, of Leonidas at Thermopylae, of Themistocles at Salamis. Mothers cradled their children, singing them the ancient songs, their voices a quiet defiance. The light of Hellenism was dimmed, but it was not extinguished. In the flickering glow of candlelit chapels, beneath the vaulted shadows of mountain monasteries, the Greek language survived. Priests taught children the words of the Gospels, but also the stories of their ancestors. In secret schools, the Krifos Scholia, they learned not just their faith, but their history, the names of their heroes, the dream of a land that was once free. The mountains became sanctuaries. In the crags and hidden valleys, free men roamed, warriors who defied the Ottoman lords, who refused to bend the knee. They were outlaws. They were heroes. They were the soul of Greece, wild and untamed, the millet system, faith as identitithe. Ottomans were conquerors, but they did not seek to erase the faiths of the people they ruled. Instead, they governed through the millet system, a system of religious communities that managed their own affairs. For the Greeks, this meant that while their land was lost, their faith was preserved. The Orthodox Church became not just a sanctuary for the soul, but the heart of their identity. At the head of this spiritual realm stood the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, the highest religious leader of the Orthodox Christians. His voice was a whisper in the ear of the sultans, a bridge between two worlds. The patriarch was both a shepherd of souls and a symbol of Greek resilience. He walked a narrow path, balancing between the demands of the Ottoman rulers and the hopes of his oppressed flock within the quiet halls of the great monasteries on Mount Athos. In Meteora, on the island of Patmos, monks copied ancient manuscripts, preserving the wisdom of Plato, Aristotle, and Homer. The light of Greek thought, so close to extinction, found refuge among the robed scholars who whispered their prayers. In ancient tongues, the church was more than a place of worship. It was a school, a refuge, a bastion of identity. The cross became a banner of quiet defiance. And in the shadowed naves of the great basilicas, the flickering candles cast shadows that danced like the souls of the ancients, but faith was not enough. Beyond the monastery walls, beyond the village churches, there was a world of struggle, a world where freedom was a distant dream. The Clefs and Armatoloi, warriors of the mountain, the rugged mountains of Greece, where the steep cliffs met the sky, free men lived the clefts. Bandits to the Ottomans, heroes to the Greeks, they were men who had cast off the chains of servitude. Their homes were the high passes. Their allies were the winds and the stones. They struck from the shadows, raiding the estates of Ottoman lords, then vanishing into the mist. The clefts were more than outlaws, they were symbols. They were the living embodiment of a Greece that would not die. Songs were sung of their deeds, tales told of their bravery. In the minds of the villagers, the clefts were not mere thieves. They were champions of a lost freedom. Beside them stood the Armatoloi, Christian soldiers who served the Ottoman state as local enforcers. But loyalty was a fluid thing in the mountains. Many Armatoloi turned against their Ottoman masters, joining the clefts in rebellion. Together, these mountain warriors struck fear into the hearts of their oppressors, their muskets and swords flashing in the mountain mist. They were men of iron, their lives hard and brief, but their names lived on in the songs of the people. In their rugged defiance, the Greeks found a glimpse of their ancient spirit, reminder that though their cities had fallen, their courage had not. The seeds of resistance in the 18th century, a whisper of change stirred among the Greeks. The world beyond their mountains and islands was changing. Across the seas in Europe, the Enlightenment was blooming, an age of reason, of liberty, of revolution. Greek merchants traveling to the great cities of the West, Venice, Vienna. Paris returned with tales of freedom and human rights. Secret societies were born. The most famous of these was the Felikiateria, the Society of Friends, a brotherhood sworn to overthrow Ottoman rule. Their oaths were whispered in darkened rooms. Their dreams were written in invisible ink. In the villages, the mountains, the monasteries, and even in the bustling ports, the word spread freedom. Scholars in Greek communities abroad, from Italy to Russia, wrote passionate appeals for liberation. Poets sang of the glories of ancient Hellas, and printers smuggled books and pamphlets into the Ottoman lands. The dream of liberty, whispered by the priests, sung by the mothers, taught by the secret schools, grew stronger. The spirit of the Greeks, so long oppressed, was stirring. The memory of their ancient heroes of Leonidas, of Themistocles, of Alexander burned bright once more. The chains were real, but so was the dream, a spirit unbroken for centuries of darkness, could not extinguish the light of Greece. Even in the shadow of the Ottoman Empire, the soul of the Greek people remained unbroken. In the mountain villages, in the secret schools, in the sacred halls of their churches, they kept alive the memory of a free and noble past. They remembered the battles of their ancestors, the marble columns of their temples, the wisdom of their philosophers. They spoke the language of Homer, whispered the prayers of the Orthodox faith, and sang the songs of their forefathers. Their land was occupied, their freedom denied, but their identity, their spirit, was untamed. The sun set over there. Mountains, but they knew it would rise again. The dream of freedom, whispered in the darkness, would one day become a cry that would echo across the mountains and the seas. The world might have forgotten the glory of Greece, but the Greeks had not forgotten themselves. Chapter 19. The Greek War of Independence. The year was 1821, and a whisper of freedom swept across the mountains and islands of Greece. It began in the shadowed glens of the Peloponnese, where the scent of spring mingled with the smell of gunpowder. The Greeks, long oppressed under Ottoman rule, rose up in rebellion. They gathered in churches and village squares, whispering the words that would become their battle cry, freedom or death. March 25, 1821, became a sacred date, the day when the flame of revolt was lit. Theodoros Kolokotronis, a grizzled warrior with a fierce gaze and a lion's heart, became one of its first champions. He rode through the hills, rallying villagers with tales of their ancient glory, of the heroes of Marathon and Thermopylae. His sword became a symbol of defiance, but Kolokotronis was not alone. In the Ionian Islands, the secret society known as the Phylikiateria had long been plotting rebellion. Its members, sworn to secrecy, spread the call to arms. From the rugged mountains of Epirus to the sunlit shores of Crete, the Greeks answered. Farmers left their fields, fishermen cast aside their nets, priests blessed the swords of the young. Men who marched off to war, the Ottomans responded with brutal force. Villages burned, their ashes scattered on the winds. The city of Chios was turned to a graveyard, its people slaughtered, its children taken as slaves. But the Greeks did not surrender. Each new atrocity only fueled their resolve. In the mountains, in the forests, in the ruined villages, the spark of freedom refused to die. Lord Byron, the English poet, sailed to Greece, drawn by the romance of the struggle. His words had stirred the hearts of Europe, but now he would wield a sword in the Greek cause. He was not a soldier, but he became a hero, dying not in battle, but from fever in the town of Missolonghi. To the Greeks, his sacrifice was a symbol of a foreigner who had given his life for their freedom across the seas. the cry of the Greeks was heard. In London, Paris, and St. Petersburg, artists painted the suffering of Greece. Poets wrote of their heroism, and wealthy men offered their fortunes to support the struggle. The world watched as a forgotten people dared to dream of liberty, the siege of Missolonghi, a tragic heroism of all the battles of the Greek War of Independence. None captured the soul of the struggle like the siege of Missolonghi. Nestled beside a saltwater lagoon, the city became a fortress, a bastion of defiance against the Ottoman might. Its walls were old, its defenders few, but their courage was boundless. In 1825, the Ottoman forces laid siege to the city. Cannons thundered, and the walls shuddered beneath the impact. The defenders fought with a desperate valor, their muskets firing from the ramparts, their swords flashing in the narrow streets. Food ran low, and starvation gnawed at their strength. Yet they refused to yield. Women and children dug trenches beside the men. The priests prayed over the dying, their voices rising like a hymn of defiance. The Greeks of Missolonghi knew their fate. They were alone, surrounded, but they were not afraid. Each day became a struggle for survival, each night a whispered prayer for freedom. By the spring of 1826, hope seemed a distant memory. The Ottoman forces tightened their grip, their cannons roaring like a storm. But the Greeks did not surrender. They planned a desperate escape, a sortie through the enemy lines. On the night of April 10th, the defenders gathered, the weak helping the strong, the wounded clutching their weapons. They burst from the gates like a wave of steel, charging into the darkness. Some fell beneath the muskets of the Ottomans, others were cut down in the chaos. Only a few escaped, but their sacrifice became legend. Missolonghi fell, but it did not die. Its name became a symbol of Greek courage, a beacon in the darkness, the Battle of Navarino. The tide-turned Greeks had fought bravely, but they were losing. Their mountains burned, their cities crumbled, their dreams seemed to wither. But far beyond their shores, in the palaces of Europe, their plight stirred powerful hearts. Britain, France, and Russia, great empires that had once watched in silence, now prepared to act. On October 20th, 1827, the fleets of these three powers sailed into the Bay of Navarino. Before them lay the Ottoman-Egyptian fleet, a mighty armada ready to crush the Greek resistance. The sea was calm, the sun bright, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. A stray shot rang out, and then another. Within moments, the calm waters became a cauldron of fire. The great ships of the Allies unleashed their cannons, and the Ottoman fleet burned. Masts cracked like thunder, sails became shrouds of flame, and the sea turned red with the blood of sailors. When the smoke cleared, the Ottoman fleet was shattered, its ashes scattered across the waves. Greece had been given a chance, a spark of hope. For the first time, the Greeks saw the possibility of victory, not just in their dreams, but on the horizon. The birth of a new Greece of victory was not immediate. The struggle continued, battles were fought, and the fields of Greece drank the blood of heroes. But the tide had turned. The great powers of Europe, moved by the bravery of the Greeks and the brutality of the Ottomans, pressed for peace. In 1830, a treaty was signed. Greece was recognized as an independent state, a fragile nation born from the ashes of oppression. Its borders were limited, its land still scarred by war, but it was free. A prince, Otto of Bavaria, was chosen as king, a foreigner on a Greek throne, but a symbol of the new nation dot in the ruined streets of Athens. The Greek flag flew. The people wept with joy, their cries a hymn to liberty. They were a free people, once more masters of their own fate. But freedom was not without its trials. The new state was weak, its government inexperienced, its economy shattered. Old rivalries simmered beneath the surface, and the dream of a united Greece remained distant. But none of this could dim the light of victory. After centuries of darkness, the Greeks had reclaimed their land, their history, their soul. The mountains whispered the names of the heroes who had fallen. The churches sang hymns of gratitude, and the children were taught not just the stories of their ancient past, but the stories of the brave men and women who had given them a future, the dream of freedom, whispered in the darkness of Ottoman rule, had become a reality. Greece was not just a memory, it was a nation once more.